Namaste and greetings. I, Karnika Arun, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Samsthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning. We are gathered for the day 2 of 3-day online certificate training program on making Indian cities disaster and climate change resilient towards responsive and actionable urban planning, policy, and development. This training program is being organized by the National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, in collaboration with IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Center for Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development, New Delhi. This 3-day training program has an excellent panel of members who will be sharing their knowledge on the above theme. The patron for the program is Shri Taj Hassan, IPS Executive Director of NIDM, New Delhi. Our conveners include Professor Anil K. Gupta, Head of ECDRM and NIDM, New Delhi. Tikinder Singh Panwar, former Deputy Mayor, Shimla, Senior Fellow at IMPRI. Dr. Sini Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI, New Delhi. Dr. Saumyadip Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor, Vishwa Bharati Shanti Niketan, Visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI, New Delhi. The distinguished expert trainers for this program are Mr. Samir Onhale, Mr. Himanshu Shekhar, Dr. Shweta Baidedas, Dr. Madhu Verma, and Ms. Fatima Amin. This training program is moderated by Shri Tikinder Singh Panwar. Coordinators for the program are Dr. Shweta Baidedas, Dr. Gopal Verma, Fatima Amin, and Harshit Sharma, NIDM. Utkarsh Dwivedi, Diya Goswami, Riyasha, and Karnika Arun from IMPRI. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping announcements once again. Please join the meeting on time. Ensure at least 80% attendance. 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A after each lecture will be provided. Share your questions on the Q&A box only and not on the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an quote-unquote anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments. Now we start our expert session by inviting Samir Onhale, sir. Sir will be bringing us his administrative experiences in disaster resilience and climate change issues in cities as one of our expert panel. We welcome and invite you for the session, sir. Over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think my voice is audible and screen is also visible. So yes, thanks for that.
Yes,
Actually, I think I must first of all congratulate IMPRI as well as the NIDM for taking this approach of engaging with the citizens by way of expert trainings and certificate courses, because disaster-related activities, it's not that a single person or a single agency is involved in the response, but it ultimately has to be an entire community response for any efforts to successfully overcome any disaster-like situations in the in urban as well as the rural areas of India. We are aware that very often the 4 keywords is what this certificate course really talks of, and that really caught my eyesight. First was city, second is disaster, third is climate change, fourth is resilience. And maybe a couple of words on these 4 things. Cities, as we know in Indian context, the census definition of 5,000 population and the non-agricultural occupations of more than 75% population density is what defines the area as urban or non-urban in the census definitions. When we move to the various state governments, every state government has by and large its own definition when to turn a urban habitat into a statutory term or not. So a municipal government or the municipal status is what we consider as giving a statutory status. And as of now, we are aware that around 4,400 odd such habitats have been declared as the statutory towns in India. So the range, of course, varies from population. Some would be mega cities like Mumbai, which is over 10 million. We may have cities like transitory areas, which are maybe around 7 or 8,000 population. Some of the centers are below 5,000 also, yet they are declared as urban due to the specific provisions in the statutory areas. So maybe a hill station, which might be 3 or 4,000, could also have a statutory status as far as the municipal functioning is concerned. So this is the broad Indian urban system of around about 4,500 cities and towns, and population at this juncture could be definitely around 500 million, maybe 45 to 50 crores is just an estimate. We are yet to come with the latest census. So the population is roughly estimated to be around maybe around 500 million. So we realize that very huge population is staying in the urban areas of India, and therefore it will be extremely important that the cities of India are well prepared, well equipped to tackle to any shocks that might come out of disaster-like scenarios. As we know, disaster scenarios can be either man-made or can be either natural. In Indian context, we are aware that the Indian monsoons is a very important geographical factor, and therefore during monsoon times, urban flooding is a fairly frequent phenomena in India, in most of the towns in Peninsula as well as in the northern plains. We do, and also in the hills, we find such at least 1 or 2 major instances of urban flooding and its consequences on the Indian cities. And this is a recurrent disaster-like scenario that has to be catered by the city or the municipal administrative systems that are available to take care with the municipal framework. Secondly, of course, is the issue of landslides. We know that those urban habitats or even rural habitats which are set up, which are in hilly areas, are often the risk of landslide is very much there. And this is, of course, a major event, a major shock event actually to the entire district or the taluka or the city, which has to be catered. It is not just only in the Himalayas, but also in the Sahyadris or even the Nilgiris, in which very strong rains during the monsoon, and maybe lesser forestation left there do result in situations like landslide-like scenarios, even in the cities. Third, of course, as we know, apart from monsoons and forests, in northern Indian cities, in the Himalayas cities, we have major snowfalls, and therefore snowfalls and its impact on those cities and habitats is also an important event related with major disasters. We spoke mostly of the geographical factors of natural disasters, but as we know, even the biological aspect of disasters, which especially with the pandemic, is also considered a major disaster threat to the Indian urban system or the Indian cities. Of course, lot of things have been said during the COVID pandemic of last 2 years. We are still going through it, and the sudden shock that disaster scenario can create into the urban city does raises the need of the cities being resilient again and again and again. And I think it's extremely important that each and every individual, maybe from the school students or the local leadership, the community leadership, the bureaucracy, among all levels of the government, the private sector, the corporate sector, needs to come together. Even then, such disaster-like scenarios are recurrently coming up, and the Indian cities will have to learn to face such scenarios. Of course, apart from the geographical and biological natures of the disasters, there are certain man-made disasters, as it is said, maybe non-geographical or non-natural reasons. Many a times it could be maybe social rioting, maybe rioting in the cities, maybe there is other scenarios like shelling, which keeps on happening in the border towns and cities. So as we realize that the nature of disasters man-made or natural, and its relationship with the climate change is now becoming more and more clear. One way we can say this is the increased frequency of this disaster-like scenario. So the assumption or the statement here is that due to the due to the climate change elements and factors which are taking place, we are now seeing increased frequency of natural disasters. It could be more frequent flooding, more frequent very heavy rainfall, more frequent cyclones which are coming either in the Bay of Bengal or the Arabian Sea, and then it creates a major impact on the that area. And as we know, the damage that such natural events cause in an urban habitat are extremely high. Of course, due to the high density of the population, due to greater concentration of economic activity of the buildings there, the impact of natural disasters on urban areas is always much higher, much stronger than as compared to the geographical area. Of course, they are equally problematic to the human cost, but the impact that a natural disaster causes in an urban densified, very highly dense and highly populated area is actually very high. And therefore we require the Indian cities to be more careful during and more prepared whenever they are thinking of these disaster situations. So I think the first part I would like to sum up here, stating that due to climate change, Indian cities will have to be prepared for more and more frequent natural disaster-like scenarios coming up on the cities, and therefore the response of the Indian cities is a very important element for us to work on. Second proposition I would like to share with the audience is that the response to any disaster-like scenario cannot remain only with the bureaucracy or only with the institutions of state or the political leadership or the community leadership. The response has to be from a whole of the city. I mean, we require a whole of the city approach whenever any city has to respond to any disaster, natural or otherwise. Therefore, the response to these such scenarios require a greater communication network and greater preparedness and greater awareness as to what needs to be done in the city framework when such a case, such a scene is going to come. Uh, Another aspect I wanted to share is during the urban flooding, the dam schedule of opening the gates and release of water has also been found to be a major reason for urban floodings. I think we require to rethink the dam release schedule of the water, because we are getting very intense and very high rainfall in a very limited duration of time. And therefore, the old dam release curves or the dam release programs that we have will have to be rethought, and maybe some weightage needs to be given for very intense and small duration and very high frequency rainfall. I think this is also an important element that we need to run, and therefore we can see a closer coordination is required amongst the various departments within the government machinery. During, I think, during when we were discussing regarding this session, I thought I would share some of the administrative experiences from the maybe chair of the commissioner or the chair of the CEO or the deputy commissioner, as what exactly happens in the municipal setup when they are faced with this kind of situation. I can share a flooding scenario. I had worked in a couple of cities here, and it was a bit surprising that any city I worked in, normally most of the Indian cities are around the rivers, along the rivers. And therefore, however dry that area might be, we always faced at least one or twice river flooding hitting that city. Maybe it was due to the release of the water through the dam or flash flooding. But most of the cities which are along the river have to face these kind of urban flooding scenarios in which the water level suddenly rises to an extent, stays there for some time, and then again recedes. But maybe whatever limited hours, or at least very limited hours that the water level rises, it creates a lot of disruption into the city functioning. So whenever I remember a city where I was working, in which we had two major floods in a gap of, I think, 3 months. And during that time, of course, there was a dam upstream, and the water release had to be done at a higher rate than otherwise, due to sudden rainfall there. And it was I think year was 2003 or 4. And during that time, the sudden release of water created a lot of panic within the citizens. So one issue to deal in a municipal framework is always engaging with the panic. And this can be done only with very clear communication. So even if the news is bad, it needs to be properly shared with the community leaders, with the local political leadership, and also with to the citizens. So earlier, during those times, one of the techniques that we had to use was to have the rickshaw and put a loudspeaker on that, or use the other government jeeps or vehicles, get hold of the police machinery, the revenue machinery, along with the municipal machinery, used to convey by loudspeakers as to X thing is going to happen, and you please do the Y thing. So this association of very simple messaging, very clear messaging, with the people, with the local political leadership, with the community leaders, with the school teachers, with the maybe religious leaders, is always very important. Because when time is the essence, we have to communicate something maybe in a matter of times, a very small short span of attention, in which it shouldn't look like a rumor, and yet people need to believe it and also act on to that. Maybe very often when the urban flood comes, when water levels start rising in the river, what is the actual first step is to remove the people from the flooded zone, and therefore people needs to close their door and leave that places and come to the higher levels which are earlier defined. Maybe mostly these are the schools or the temples or the community centers of the municipal bodies, which are normally earmarked earlier. And also a disaster plan, which is now almost a yearly ritual, that every year during month, at least in the peninsular states, before the monsoons, the list of centers, rescue centers, is mentioned, and necessary support mechanism for these rescue centers is already determined, thought of. There are a lot of preparatory meetings which happens with the maybe the municipal commissioner, the district collector, the police machinery, and also the local ministers, the local MLAs are also part of that. And therefore, from say 15th May to the 10th of June, lots of such interactions do happen on regular basis, in which the the assessment of probable disasters, the plan of action as to how to respond are prepared by every district, and also every municipality is ready with such a plan of action on what is to be done when such any of the identified disasters that might start. So currently, in at least in peninsular India, for the part where I'm working, most of these preparations of the on the urban flooding is normally done. Yet there is always an element of surprise, that nature can never be taken for granted, and whatever preparations that you do, you will always be faced with situations in which you have never anticipated. So I think as far as the urban flooding and the municipal framework is concerned, use of I think engaging with the community leaders and the community, I think, is a very important element of disaster management framework, in which the cities have to interact and have to react. Apart from urban floods, I think cyclone is a new phenomena, at least in the western part of India. The frequency is increasing. In fact, earlier, maybe 7 to 8 years back, we hardly remember the major cyclones, coming up in the Arabian Sea, and they coming to the coast of Maharashtra, or maybe we had never seen the frequency. But now, for last 4 to 5 years, we are seeing daily. I mean, every year there are at least 2 to 3 cyclone events which do happen, and the havoc that cyclones create in urban habitat is really really very hard and very harsh. And this again, the framework of when we talk of municipal setup, then even from the safai karmachari, who has to be on the field with probably axe to cut the trees, and also the electrician, the linemen, they are with the municipal bodies, the plumbing, the water supply department, that has to be also alert. Because what happens is that during the disaster, any disaster that struck up, so normally what we see is first damage is with the water supply scheme or the electricity supply of the city. And this bringing back this electricity supply, bringing back this water supply, bringing back the sewage system, I think bringing back, of course, the solid waste management. Normally, a lot of muck comes up on the city, silt comes up on the streets, and maybe a lot of floating garbage comes on the streets, and that needs to be also cleared, very fast. So sometimes the existing municipal strength or the existing manpower that the municipalities have is not that really can cater to this kind of sudden shock event that a disaster related event gives to the city. And therefore the necessary emergency measures, although they are planned, but getting manpower, getting machinery, getting the rescue centers operational, getting having the manpower reaching to that rescue center, interacting with the social organizations there, taking help of the community or the religious centers which are in the city, has to be done very fast, when maybe very simultaneously. So the time pressure, and that really creates time pressure that is there on the municipal staff, on the revenue staff, on the police staff, and also the engineering staff, is something which is very high, and is something may not be easily appreciated outside. The situations into which the people have to work, and it is their credit to many times, they brave the situation. We of course now are having a greater system of training even to the most fundamental workers of the municipality, maybe the safai karmachari, maybe the PWD laborers, and other water supply laborers which are in the municipal setup. And this continuous training actually needs to be increased. What we are doing, of course, we always say that it is never sufficient when we are taking efforts and when you are making preparations to engage with any disaster-like scenario. It has surprises that you have never anticipated. You'll always be thrown up challenges which you never felt, and then at the last moment, there is this always rush of getting the resources, getting the manpower, getting the machinery to that location. Many a times it is at the darkest hours of the night. Maybe your phones are not working, your mobile network often goes down, and then all the technology that you had, at least in those half hour or 1 hour of the initial shock of such climate events, is something that you have to go back to your own personal strengths and maybe strengths of social relations to overcome these scenarios. Third, I think we already down 20 minutes, but I will just use my last 5 minutes on the use of technology that we could do during the disaster-like scenarios. One, of course, pandemic was a great teacher. Tremendous lessons are to be learned by us. I think there needs to be a lot of debriefing sessions that needs to be done across the length and breadth of the country as to what actually happened, and the experiences and the events needs to be recorded, needs to be analyzed, and also some patterns and studies need to be made as to if at all there is, again, unfortunately, if at all there is some another kind of such scenario, we should be better prepared to respond, and we should be better prepared, and our manpower needs to be trained. And most importantly, the voluntary workers, the community organizers need to be incorporated into the existing disaster management framework. Of course, there are provisions, there are opportunities, yet the volunteerism that exists is very often personal. Sporadic may not be the right word, but it is, it's more at the impulse, at the pulse of the at that moment, there's impulsively many things happen. People do come with greater good intentions. However, I think we need to prepare a voluntary, there are provisions of voluntary workers into the fire brigade acts of many states in which we can prepare a voluntary force of workers. I think apart from home guards, we need to prepare experiment at the city level also. Fourth, I think experiment I would like to share was the city level disaster force that we had created in maybe 3-4 years back in the city of Thane in Maharashtra. On the basis of the NDRF and the SDRF, we also created a 100-strong TDRF, as we used to call it, for the Thane disaster relief force. And this city level initiative, I think, was a very good experiment which can be replicated in other parts of the city also. Especially the bigger municipal corporations can have their own city disaster relief force, so that they don't have to always depend on the NDRF or the SDRF, because the NDRF, of course, has its own issues, and therefore we need to bigger cities and corporations need to have their own disaster relief forces. I think the Disaster Management Act also, it's now almost 20 years old, and we need to infuse more urban component into the the disaster relief disaster management act, because district also happens to be the only basic focal point of most of the legislations in India, which is of course inevitable. But however, now with greater urban characteristic in the Indian population, and making and in attempts to make the cities more resilient to the disaster and climate change scenarios, the Disaster Management Act need to include more and more urban characteristic. For example, bigger municipal corporations need to have an independent district management authority or the city management authority, which currently there is only a consultative committee which is in most of the districts or city levels. But I think we need to give the same kind of status to a city, a big city area, the way it has been done to the Disaster Management Act for a district. So I think this institutional some enhancement is also necessary. And I think lastly, I would like to focus on an example that, is just a illustration as to how a city disaster relief force, the TDRF as we used to call here, was very effective and very useful during event. As you're aware, there was one of the railways which were going from Mumbai to one of the southern cities, got stuck up in a place near Badlapur due to sudden increase in the water level. And the water level has risen almost to the floor of the railway, and the entire railway was stuck up for almost 8 to 10 hours. And during this case, as the TDRF, as the NDRF, of course, has its own locational issues, this city disaster relief force immediately rushed. They were adequately equipped with necessary, boats, and even we had given satellite phones to this city disaster relief force. And I think they were the first one to reach to the location, and they already started the rescue. And of course, later we had the Navy and the NDRF also coming to rescue the people. So it is also important for the cities to make their own capacities, enhance their more own abilities, rather than continuously depending upon the NDRF or the SDRF. And bigger cities, of course, should have their own disaster relief forces. We need to have the special and more frequent training of not only the people in fire brigade or the other water utilities, but also, as we keep on saying, the whole of the city approach, the whole of the community approach for any disaster management is absolutely essential. And lastly, maybe last 2 minutes I would take is on the concept of resilience and the Indian cities. As we know, resilience in a common language can be understood as the ability of the city to keep continuing as normal despite of the external pressures which a disaster might create. Like if there is a very heavy rainfall in maybe Delhi or Mumbai or any of the cities, we should be in a position to continue the city functioning as normal even if such a disaster event occurs. It could be urban flood, it could be other such events. So therefore, especially we learned in a bad way with the impact of COVID on the Indian economy and the pressures it created on the urban poor and elements of inclusion. The ability to keep the city functioning as normal despite the various disasters that might strike us is a very important part of resilience framework that now we are thinking of. There are many city resilience ideas which are happening. A lot of international networks are coming. The ministry, the various think tanks, the various philanthropies, the academic institutions are focusing on resilience of Indian cities due to challenges that we may be facing due to climate change. And this framework needs to not only talk of finance and technology, but also of community engagement, which is always a very, very important part of any city. City is defined not by the municipality, but by the citizens. And therefore, whenever we are thinking of any element in any issue that is to be dwelt upon and worked upon in the cities, must include the citizens. Citizens need to be the basic focal point, of whatever cities have to do. And yes, technology is always there, finance is there, community leadership is always there, but we need a new partnership now. This connect with the city and the citizens is a very important element. It is this connect, this emotional connect, which will always make the citizens come up and rise up to any challenge and respond to any situation. As we learned in last 2 years, it was the citizens which responded to various disaster-like scenarios. So citizens, technology, finance, community leadership, and of course academic trainings and these kind of trainings which are extremely important to sensitize people that whenever it is not that we start working on disaster when the disaster strikes. The working for disaster is continuous effort. It is from day one. It is from every moment. Every one of us needs to be aware and be prepared for any eventuality. And especially this decade seems to be a rather turbulent one. The first 1 or 2 years have not been what we had already expected. And maybe we need to be prepared ourselves, brace ourselves for greater, intense, and more frequent situations for any eventuality. And I am confident that India would definitely overcome any of such situations that we might face. So I think it is half an hour, so it's almost 11:30. So I think I should stop my monologue here and maybe request our chairperson, our dear friend Tikandarji, to take us forward with ahead. So thanks a lot, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful presentation and for enlightening us. I would also like to add that Mr. Sameer Unhale is Joint Commissioner, Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra. Thank you, sir, for taking your time. Now we move on to the Q&A session with our participants.
There's a question also.
Yes, sir.
Would you just place that question to Mr. Sameer?
Sure. Dr. Sangeeta Saxena ji has asked, if these mock trainings already given to the localities, the announcements will be more beneficial for them to identify what action they need to follow in a particular situation. Is there any such training given to local people?
So actually, such trainings need to be given. Very honestly, I am not aware of direct community engagement on such training. I mean, what we normally do is that in any municipal government, there is a network of women self-help group or the resident community volunteers in the earlier urban poverty elevation programs. And this community network is very often used to sensitize people. But I would like to have much more formal and much more structured communication with the communities for for the community. And I think it's a good suggestion. We will take this suggestion and maybe we would be in a position to have a syllabus design to all the community people who wants to be a part of such volunteerism. I think it's a great idea, and thank you very much for that idea. We'll start working on it.
Utkarsh Dwivedi has raised his hand. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, please.
Hello, good morning, sir. I'm Utkarsh Dwivedi from IMPRI. Sir, I have a question that tier 3 towns, census towns, and statutory towns are most vulnerable regions to climate change due to rapid urbanization, unplanned growth, migration, and lack of planning interventions. So, how can small ULBs with low financial sustainability combat climate change in such areas?
Yeah, so actually the geographical scenario into which the city is very often defines the kind of challenges it would be facing. So if I mean, Indian geographical variations, are vast. We have from desert to snow to mountains to Himalayas to island to, maybe evergreen forest. So this geographical variations that we have, obviously this assessment will have to be done, and that's what exactly the disaster preparedness plans is supposed to do. That even in fact the Disaster Management Act does allow, and every city prepares, every municipality prepares a small, at least maybe a small document. The document is there, which tries to assess the challenges that it would be facing. For example, if it is in maybe towns like in the Himalayan foothills, obviously landslide, maybe heavy urbans would be there. So first of all, there will have to be assessment of the challenges that events that it might be facing. And as we know, the preparedness of the disaster management framework is often into 3 hours of rescue, retrieval, relief. And so immediate, very often the municipal setup, even if it's a small town, I had earlier worked, been in my earlier probation days, worked in a small town. So therefore, the small size of the city, to an extent, doesn't inhibit its preparedness. So that's my observation, that even if the city town is small, it will be by and large capable of handling its situation on its own if the preparedness is done. And that's where the expert advice and expert intervention and continuous hand-holding is something which needs to be done to the municipal level also. That okay, if there is a rainfall, you identify the high ground, you identify the who would be going there in case of situation, which person or which 2-3 people will be responsible for getting the dry ration, getting the medical help, and identifying the resources. So basically in the disaster management preparedness plan, we identify the local resources, private or government, and then a line of action is normally available that if X happens, that ABC will be doing the puke thing. So this side of correspondence is to an extent there, and that's how the smaller towns will have to be prepared.
वर्कशॉप कर रही हूँ
Yeah. So
नहीं पार्टिसिपेट
yeah, so this kind of, Prasadik, preparedness is the main crux of any disaster management preparedness. And as I said, due to the climate change, the frequency and intensity of natural disasters is going to grow higher and higher. And therefore, we would be requiring greater community engagements for that. And as was asked by the very good question and suggestion, that we require to reach to the community level on the disaster preparedness also. So of course, exhibitions having such poster displays are also various ways by which we reach to the people. But this idea of having a voluntary force or voluntary group for disaster preparedness of the willing citizens, I think is a great idea, and we need to really work on to it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Two questions have been asked by Onkar Puriji. Sir, Tikinder sir, you're muted. Can I ask them questions or you want to add points?
No, read all those questions.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll raise two issues, but
Okay.
maybe last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Onkar Puriji has asked, why did Maharashtra discontinue first responder of Ministry Home Affairs under Directorate of Civil Defense were discontinued? A follow-up question is, how much damages has to be incurred after abolishing first responder in communities, that is civil defense? Another question has also been he's asked is are authorities aware of importance of first responder, including civil defense, scouts and guides, home guards, NSS, NCC? How many training sessions were engaged to train the community, school, college, university, SHG and NGOs? Sir, would you like to add? Sunale sir?
Yeah, so I think regarding this specific question which deals with the Director of Civil Defense, I won't be the correct person to speak on to it, as the concerned directorate would be taking a call. So from the municipal setup, I won't be in a position to comment or respond to that question. It deals with the other department itself. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Tarun Panji has asked where there is no municipality or similar common community network, particularly in the hills. How do we incorporate volunteers into our disaster management force? Sir?
Just a moment.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I think if I could understand the question was that wherever there are no municipalities, how do you connect with the voluntary workers? If that was the question, I think even the Gram Panchayat system is fairly strong in India now. It's almost 50, 60 years in which the Gram Panchayat Jilla Parishad system is functioning. And the community network of even if it's a village, I think the community bonding is much stronger. And it even the rural Gram Panchayat, the rural local bodies are quite vibrant, and they do respond using the traditional social community network also. And the presence of government bodies, even in the smaller rural agencies, is also quite significant. And I personally don't see any major issue in engaging the community workers with the rural local bodies wherever there are no urban centers. And it is, in my view, working fairly vibrantly in various parts, at least in the part which I have seen in Maharashtra. The rural bodies are much more, in fact, they are much more active than the urban bodies as far as community engagement and volunteerism is concerned.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Kalika, I just need to raise one issue. Thank you,
Yes.
Samir Saab. I'm so sorry, and I joined a little late because I was engaged in another meeting, and we have heard lots of stories about you, about your proactive work, and how you integrate various institutions and even individuals together. I just want you to comment on a very recent statement. I do not know whether I have overread it or I have underread it, of one of your ministers, Mr. Thackeray, that soon we will be transferring, which is, I mean, one of the pivotal demands of the city governments, that planning in Mumbai will be done by the Mumbai Municipal Corporation. I think it will be a great transfer of responsibility from the the development authorities, and I think there also lies a chance where you can integrate your city action plans into the overall city development plan. So how would you like to respond to that? And I think secondly, all the best for the coming monsoons. I mean, how well you have to respond to that.
Well, there's thanks a lot. Due to last 2 years of COVID, we have forgotten all other aspects of the routine disaster functions, and we hope that we are better prepared, this time also for the monsoon. I think regarding the issue of planning authorities, maybe it's a special planning authority and the development authorities and the municipal government. I think in Maharashtra we have municipal corporation as the primary planning authorities everywhere. In fact, even, of course, I haven't worked in Mumbai proper. I haven't worked in Mumbai Corporation proper as yet, so may not be in a very strong grounding to identify the details. But by and large, the broader framework in which the urban development functioning is here, the approach, of course, is to give greater prominence to the locally elected bodies and the planning authorities in any of the urban setup. And I think that framework would be extended even to all the cities and towns. And because the public opinion, the collective wisdom that emerges out of the local leadership, and there may be certain cases of interpretation, but I think the sum total of collective wisdom that emerges through people's public opinion and the people representative is always a greater, more appropriate than the techno-bureaucratic solutions that one might think of. I think that of course is a important stand, which even in many philosophical approaches and academically it is stated that the need of, I mean, the techno-managerial approach is good as a decision support system. There may be bureaucracies good to support, but I think the wisdom that emerges out of collectively is something which is closest to the needs and aspirations of the people. So I think even such a broader philosophy for planning would, I'm sure, find resonance in most parts of this profession. Yeah.
Karnika, I think you can take please go ahead.
Thank you, Samir Hunale, sir, and Tikendra, sir, for your valuable points. Next, the next expert trainer who have joined us today is Himanshu Shekhar, Senior Editor, Political and Current Affairs, New Delhi Television Limited. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much. You're able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Can I start now?
Sure, sir. You can start.
I have a PowerPoint presentation. I think I'll have to share the screen first, right?
Yes, sir.
You're able to see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Please go.
Full screen, sir.
Yeah, okay. So the title of my presentation is Climate Change, Urban Flooding, and a Climate Smart Development Agenda, Targets and Challenges for India. And I wish to start with a couple of images of Kerala floods, because as a reporter who has covered disasters, this was one flood incident after which...
Go full screen from below. Slideshow mode.
Slideshow. Slide sorter.
इसके सर right जहाँ पे yes नहीं उसके बगल yes
okay yeah. So as you can see, the intensity of the flood disaster that happened in Kerala in 2018, and it attracted a lot of global attention. And I remember I was covering Met Department at that time, and I interviewed Met Director General at that time, KJ Ramesh, and he had said on camera for the first time that the Kerala flood was an outcome of climate change. Now, till that time, the government was not very, very certain, and this was perhaps the first disaster incident after which the government of India admitted that there was an impact of climate change behind this unprecedented flood disaster in Kerala. Now, I think this slide is not very well opening on my screen. Can I go back to the... Is that all right with you? Arjun sir, can I continue with this? Because some sentences are getting blurred now.
Yes, sir. Yes,
This is better. Yeah,
this is
better.
Okay. So the Home Ministry issued a status report, which was also tabled in Parliament of India, and it said that the worst monsoon disaster in the state since 1924, and it affected more than 5 million people across 14 districts, and 486 people died. We do know that there was a significant impact on the infrastructure, and floods damaged around 3,600 kilometers of district roads, 2,590 kilometers of panchayat roads, and 106 kilometers of state highways. And in terms of economic losses, and this is one of the primary themes of my presentation today, was 40,000 crore. Remember, Kerala is not a very big state. And one disaster incident caused losses up to 40,000 crore. And then the CII Kerala chapter of Confederation of Indian Industry chairman issued a statement saying, our estimates are that direct losses alone in terms of capital investments and machinery are to the tune of 20,000 crores. Another 10,000 crore to 20,000 crore is estimated to be the indirect losses. So industry agreed with the government's estimate. And this flood incident created a lot of global attention, and UN Secretary General issued a statement, and I just read, this was part of a statement he had made by releasing the new climate economy report. He said, climate change is running faster than we are. Last year, climate-related disasters were responsible for thousands of deaths and $320 billion in losses. This year, we have seen the terrible flooding in Kerala in India. The last 19 years included 18 of the warmest years on record. So Kerala flood actually attracted attracted a lot of attention. And we do know that this was almost a kind of a sequel in the sense that we saw Kashmir floods in 2014. 14 months later, we saw Chennai go under floods. That was also a very, very devastating flood incident that Chennai had to face. And this is, I interviewed Med DG at that time, KJ Ramesh, and this is his exact quote that he had given to me after the Kerala floods. He said, Kerala floods were an outcome of the impact of climate change itself. Country has witnessed the evidence of significant changes in extreme weather events, and the extreme rainfall in Kerala happened because of these changes in India's climate. In terms of rainfall, it was exceptionally high. And when the rainfall is exceptionally high, it doesn't give much space or time to the disaster relief agencies to take preventive action. He also said that we have studied the rainfall data in last 50 years, and this is part of a disturbing trend, especially in the urban centers. He said the frequency of daily rainfall up to 10 centimeter to 15 centimeter has significantly increased since 1947, while the intensity of low rainfall of up to 5 centimeter has decreased in India. This has happened because of global warming. He also said at the global level, 10 cyclones used to be recorded on an average. Now their average number has increased to 18 in a year. And we have seen in the last couple of years, the frequency of cyclone incidents also has alarmingly increased in India. Now coming to the Srinagar floods, and I had the opportunity to cover these floods as a news correspondent right on the ground. And this is one of the first images you see on the screen, shot from an AN-32 transport aircraft. And this is Srinagar city, which is completely flooded. And as far as you can see, there are no visible roads. And this was the worst flood disaster incident in more than 100 years in Srinagar's history. I remember Srinagar is a valley, a part of a valley, and such a flood incident was something that city administration, the state government were not prepared for. And as Home Ministry said in its report tabled in Parliament, this was the worst flood incident since 1902. It killed 287 people, and large parts of the affected zones remained submerged. I remember there were colonies which remained under floods for 15, 16 days because it was like a cup. So when the water enters a valley, it's very difficult for the water to be taken out of it. Now, above average rainfall in 10 out of 22 districts of the state. This is the Met Department report on Kashmir floods. The recorded rainfall was highest in Shopian district, which received 2,953% above normal rainfall. Srinagar district also received 1,410% above normal rainfall. Now, I'm sure that no city administration anywhere in the world would be prepared to face a rainfall of this high intensity. 2,953% above normal rainfall would be very devastating for any civic administration anywhere in the world. And this also, because of the significant damage it caused, became the costliest disaster in 2014 in the entire world, and it cost India $16 billion. And remember, the Jammu Kashmir also is a very small state. And if a state like Jammu and Kashmir loses $16 billion, and the state government's estimate was around in the excess of 1 lakh crores, in fact, one can very well imagine the sustainability of the development process in a state like Jammu and Kashmir, or even a small state like Kerala, would be significantly affected. Now, these are images that we shot there, and you can see that these are shops which remain flooded for many days. This is one of the main markets in Srinagar city, and these are the migrant workers who started to move out of their flooded homes when the water level started rising. And as you can see, again here in this image, the shops and the traders had to close their shop, and all the goods in these shops that you see were badly damaged. This is another image of that market, and nothing was left in all these shops that you see on the screen. Now, Jammu Kashmir Finance Minister at that time, Hasib Drabu, in his budget speech a few months later on 22nd March said, the total income of the state has declined by 1.5% in 2014-15 to a little less than 88,000 crore. With this, the average per capita of a common man in Jammu Kashmir has declined from 59,279 rupees to 58,888 rupees. So you can see the debilitating impact that a flood incident can do to a state economy, to the city administration and people. And we do know, and I did keep asking this question to state government officials, that why there was no state disaster response force visible anywhere. And I was told that actually Jammu Kashmir government had not even set up an SDRF, which they had to under the Disaster Management Act of 2005. And we do know there was fear of epidemic everywhere, and the civic administration, the civic authorities were not at all prepared to face a disaster of this scale. The official documents also show that Jammu and Kashmir state government did not act seriously on specific warnings and alert issued by leading state agencies. India's premier institution dealing with disaster research, the NIDM, in fact, had categorically warned the Jammu Kashmir government 2 years back in 2012 that illegal and unauthorized construction on river banks in the state was destroying the river ecosystem. And IDM had specifically cautioned the state government that sand and gravel dredging or topsoil denudation for brick industry to support growing real estate industry have significantly enhanced the human-induced disaster risk in the eco-sensitive zones of the state. But as the flood tragedy unfolded, it became absolutely clear to everyone that state government had failed to act seriously, even despite such very specific warnings by the NIDM. Now, Center for Science and Environment also studied the drainage system in the Srinagar city, and it termed the collapse of the drainage system as the primary reason behind the heavy damage caused by the floods. And in fact, in its investigative report, the Center for Science and Environment argued that between 1911 and 2004, Srinagar city had in fact lost half of its water bodies. The unplanned urbanization has led to encroachment of lakes, which has reduced their ability to absorb water during floods. And this is one common theme, and Tikendra sir, of course, is an expert in this. He would know this better, that these are the primary variables you see across the country. The problems in drainage systems, storm drains are choked across different parts of India. And of course, the water bodies are gradually dying. There are no serious effort to conserve them. And the unplanned urbanization and the emergence of illegal colonies of riverbeds is a phenomena we see across the country. In Delhi, I've done documentaries, and we do all know which are the colonies which are illegal colonies, where the bylaws have been violated, but no action has been initiated. And this, of course, will be very devastating if, God forbid, such a disaster incident were to happen. Then Chennai floods. 14 months later, we were reporting on Chennai floods of November, December 2015. As you can see in the image, how badly it crippled the infrastructure in the city. And this is one of the defining images of Chennai floods, the airport underwater. And these are aircrafts, as you can see, where they remained. This airport remained flooded. And in this image, you can more specifically see how badly the floods actually had damaged the civic infrastructure. If an airport like this can be flooded, one can very well imagine what would have happened in other parts of the city which were crowded. 470 people are estimated to have died. 4.92 lakh houses were damaged. And this is, of course, very, very damaging for a city like Chennai. And here also, the Chennai flood crisis was exacerbated by encroachments in lakes and river channels, and also congestion in Chennai city's drainage system. In its report tabled in Parliament on Chennai floods, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs argued that encroachments have significantly reduced the carrying capacity of water bodies. The point that Tikendra sir made in the context of Srinagar was also mentioned here, and discussed also in Parliament when the Chennai flood came up for discussion. The failure of civic agencies to carry out desilting of the storm water drains further exacerbated the problem in Chennai. And this is a report tabled in Rajya Sabha. The problem was compounded by the failure of the civic agencies to act despite several warnings regarding the significant decline in the carrying capacity of water bodies in Chennai. And now I come to the larger picture that emerges from these small case studies that I've just mentioned, that these three flood incidents actually have exposed the fault lines in India's disaster management strategy. And it shows that how weak India's big cities are in terms of having the capability to combat and face such disaster incidents. And it, of course, has exposed the vulnerability of urban India with regard to flood incidents. Absence of regular desilting operations and effective flood zone planning has compounded the problem during these flood incidents. Now, we do know that this mushrooming of illegal colonies that a point just made and the housing structures along riverbeds are in blatant violation of environmental norms and building bylaws, and also the congestion in the city drainage system is a perennial problem across cities. Encroachment of riverbed. I was stunned when I was told that Jawahar Nagar colony, where I first went to shoot my first story in Srinagar. Now, I was told that no person living in the Jawahar Nagar locality would get compensation because it was just situated on the Jhelum riverbed, and this is not a regularized colony. And this, of course, was an encroachment of the riverbed, another incident by the real estate mafia, and it has reduced the water carrying capacity of the Jhelum River in Srinagar, and also the important lakes that I just mentioned above in the Chennai city as well. Now, one last study, the Center for Environment, Science and Environment cited records available with the Water Resources Department of Tamil Nadu to highlight the problem of encroachment, which has significantly reduced the storage capacity of major lakes and drains in the city. The official records show the area of 19 major lakes shrunk from 1,130 hectares in the 1980s to around 645 hectares by the early 2000s. It significantly reduced their storage capacity, and the CSE research also has shown that the storm water drains are clogged and require urgent desiltation. Importantly, a Chennai Metropolitan Authority report itself has revealed that construction of 150,000 illegal structures have destroyed around 300 water bodies in Chennai. And I am doubtful as to whether any corrective action has actually followed after the 2015 flood incident. And if you just look at the economic losses these three flood incidents caused, Jammu and Kashmir government estimated losses in the excess of 1 lakh crore. In case of Chennai, it was more than 15,000 crore. In case of Kerala, I just mentioned about, it was around 40,000 crore. So these three flood incidents alone, if you just add up, it adds to around 155,000 crores. That is $21.62 billion in cumulative economic losses. And here we're talking about, Tikender sir, only three flood incidents. And can a country like India, a developing country like India, afford such huge losses? And if you just add up all flood incidents that have happened since September 2014, the number would be many times more than this. And this is a loss that India faces with every monsoon. And you also very in a very lucid way warned the Maharashtra government also, and we do know that the climate change impact will be visible in the monsoon this year as well. And this has been the disturbing trend across the world. And UN research has actually shown the number of disaster incidents between 1976 and 1995 was 3,017. And in the next 2 decades, 1996 to 2014, the number of such climate-related disasters increased to 6,392. And I think it has further increased now if you look at last 1 decade. And that shows that the disaster, the frequency, the intensity, the scale of climate-related disasters has actually doubled, more than doubled, in fact, in last 2 decades. And that is the larger challenge the urban centers are facing today. And lives lost is also very significant. The UNDRR and CRED report of 2016 said India lost 97,691 precious lives in disasters between 1996 and 2015 alone. This is a 10-year figure, and such long-term studies are also very, very less, in the sense that actually is one of the issues that needs to be addressed. More research in terms of the damages that these flood incidents cause to the development process. India ranks 7th most vulnerable country, we all know, to climate change impact in the Global Climate Risk Index 2021. And underdevelopment, institutional failure, bad governance is aggravating the damages that disasters are causing to the urban centers. And Indian industry also is one of the victims of this increase in the frequency, scale, and intensity of disaster incidents. Now, what needs to be done? We need an integrated approach towards disaster management and development planning to improve the disaster governance measures that are urgently needed and strengthen the mitigation and risk reduction capabilities of Indian cities. India has also to further align its disaster risk reduction and climate mitigation strategies with the Sustainable Development Goals and Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. A few points about the Disaster Management Act. I've been reporting on this for a very long time. Concepts like climate change, global warming, and concepts like sustainable development finds no mention in the Disaster Management Act. And I remember I interviewed the then Home Minister Rajnath Singh on the sidelines of the Sendai World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction held in Sendai. And he had said that we are now thinking of amending the Disaster Management Act, but it has been 7 years now. At the moment, we are still waiting for the government to take steps to amend these laws to update it with the growing challenges that India faces. Even concepts like corporate social responsibility finds no mention in India's nodal law. And of course, these nodal legislation needs to be amended because several new interventions are needed. A question, last couple of points, Tikendra sir, on the funds part of it. Now, I remember when I was researching on the Parliament website, large number of MPs were asking questions on what is the quantum of funds India needs to actually attain the SDG goals that we have committed. Initially, no assessment has been made. We will update the Parliament very soon. And finally, in 2018, and this is, I think, one of the first admission by government that an assessment has in fact been made about the quantum of fund needed. And he said, the former Minister of State for Environment, Mahesh Sharma, who is now an MP of Lok Sabha, as per India's nationally determined contribution submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 2015, at least US $2.5 trillion will be required to meet 2030 targets. Now, we do know that we are still in the COVID phase, and we do know the debilitating impact of COVID-19 pandemic in India. We do know that first couple of quarters we were in a state of contraction. The 2020-21 financial year, we were in contraction stage, and now we have struggled to come out of that. But we do know that the debilitating impact of COVID-19 pandemic has made while it has made these SDG targets more important for India because it has increased poverty, hunger and malnutrition. But at the same time, it has also made these targets difficult because now government will need to allocate more funds, I think. And this figure, of course, would be much more in the post-COVID phase. Now, why are these SDG targets important for our cities? Because 10 of the 17 SDGs and 25 of the 169 targets identified are related to disaster risk reduction. So these SDG targets are very important for civic authorities. Now, SDG 13, international community needs to invest $6 billion annually. This is a question that appears in every global climate forum, and commitments are made, but there is always a gap in terms of what the developed countries commit and what they do in reality. But of course, these attempts are being made. And at the Glasgow Climate Change Conference, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself went, several new commitments were made. Now, what did India commit there? India committed as part of the national statement delivered at the COP26 in Glasgow. India made the following announcements. Point one, India's non-fossil energy capacity to reach 500 gigawatt by 2030. India will meet 50% of its energy requirements with renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce its total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now to 2030. India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by 45% by 2030 over 2005 levels. And by 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero emissions. Now, these are the larger commitments we have made. And I think it's imperative for the government, for state government, for city administrations to take urgent steps so that India meets this commitment, because these commitments are central to how well we can fight climate change, how better it could be to combat disasters in future. We do know that Sendai framework has also outlined that it is mandatory for small and big businesses to integrate disaster risk reduction practices in their management practices. And I think this disaster risk reduction vision also needs to be weaved in India's larger development strategy at the national level. When it comes to city development planning processes, we have to integrate a disaster risk reduction vision so as to make our cities, our administration more resilient in terms of combating the challenges that climate change is posing. Now, industries located in urban centers especially need to develop risk assessment methodologies, risk metrics, and indicators of sustainability for different class of infrastructure projects. And one last point, I was just reading, and I've read lots of literature on this, and I, in fact, wrote a research paper which was published by Routledge in an international volume, is the idea of a legal right to compensation to poor people. Remember, when flood comes, it is the weakest homes that get washed away first, and it is the poor who suffer the most. And at the moment, the systems that we have, there is no provision for compensation. And so, if a person, let's say a migrant worker living in a city which is flooded, loses his income for a very significant period of time, loses all meager resources that he or she has. And in Srinagar, when I was reporting, I remember I was surrounded by a group of migrant workers from UP and Bihar, and they said that I asked them, so have you got any help or compensation from the state administration? I was told that their I-cards, many of them complained that their I-cards were washed away with their homes. And so when they went to seek compensation support from the civic authorities who were engaged in relief work, they were told that they have to first prove that they have lived in the city and they have the necessary identification cards with them. And none of them had that. And that essentially meant that they received actually nothing from the state administration. These were the most vulnerable, most poor people. Some of them had worked for 15, 20 years in Srinagar and nearby districts, but none of them, as they told me, got any kind of help or compensation. And they said that our life is over. We are leaving Srinagar now. We're going back to our homes. So I think we need to think about, when you're talking about disaster resilience of cities, we also have to empower the poor, the urban poor, give them assurances. We have to help them rebuild their lives and livelihood in the post-disaster phase. And the relief and compensation for the poor, and this is a question on the quantum of compensation will come up. And we do know, and we have reported in NDTV this, that in Sarura village, for example, in Jammu, in September 2014, the Agriculture Department issued checks worth 47 rupees to 400 rupees as relief to the flood-affected villagers for their crop and poultry losses. This was in accordance with the norms that we have now. And many of these villagers, they went to the district administration and revenue officials and returned these checks saying that they don't need any relief from the government. So that this is one issue that needs to be actually addressed. We do need a rights-based approach to compensation to actually help urban people. And also one last point on the Stafford Act, which United States actually had brought in to help disaster victims. And I think this is an act which it can be a role model for all state governments in India. And what does it say? The United States has codified the right of disaster victims to seek compensation by incorporating specific provisions in its disaster laws. The Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, which is broadly referred globally as the Stafford Act, clearly outlines the broad responsibilities of the state in providing compulsory relief and compensation to disaster victims. The Section 410 has a provision for grant of an unemployment assistance to disaster victims who have lost their source of livelihood. We saw US government launch a $2 trillion really COVID relief package as well during the pandemic, which was also a disaster. The president is authorized to provide to any individual unemployed as a result of a major disaster such benefit assistance as he deems appropriate while such individual is unemployed for the weeks of such unemployment with respect to which the individual is not entitled to any other unemployment compensation or a waiting period credit. Such assistance as the president shall provide shall be available to an individual as long as the individual's unemployment caused by the major disaster continues, or until the individual is re-employed in a suitable position, but no longer than 26 weeks after the major disaster is declared. It's very well codified. For at least 26 weeks, the US government has to provide compensation to every disaster victim in the US who has lost livelihood opportunities. And this is also emergency grant mechanism is there. The Secretary of Agriculture has been given powers and authority to do that. And the last point, and I read this very important section of the Home Ministry's annual report released in 2011, and this actually substantiates what I've seen in my village in Bihar, that every year during the monsoon, the point that you make, Tikendra sir, the poor people know that this is the timeline. Every time the rivers flowing from Nepal into India, in the bordering parts of Nepal, Bihar border, where my village is, every time the rivers flowing from Nepal into India, the water level goes up. The poor people, landless people, are forced to leave my village and they go to the upper areas where they are more safe. And what happens is that by the time they come back, their weak homes, kacha homes, are washed away by floods. So every year they have to reconstruct a kacha home. And I remember a worker who worked in my home, in my ancestral village, told me that all the money that they earn in a year is spent on making a kacha home for his family. And before monsoon, they take it for granted that it will get washed away. And that is a very, very debilitating for a poor, landless family in any part of the country. And this is where I want to end with this one small quote from the Home Ministry. This is annual report issued in 2011. Poverty and risk to disasters are inextricably linked and mutually reinforcing. The poor section of the society is worst affected in case of disaster. Poverty also compels the poor to migrate and live at physically more vulnerable locations, often on unsafe land and in unsafe shelters. These inhabitations of the poor at such locations are either due to the fact that there is no other land available at reasonable cost, or it is close to the employment opportunities. The habitations of the poor people on the marginal land are prone to all types of disasters. The type of construction of these houses further deteriorates the condition. These dwellings, made up of low-cost material, without giving much consideration to technical aspect, are easy targets of various hazards. And this is the larger challenge we face whenever we plan anything to make our cities more resilient. We need to think that disasters perpetuate poverty, and we need to have special provisions to help the urban poor, especially, who are living in our disaster-prone urban centers. Tikendra sir, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Himanshu sir, for your insightful presentation. Tikendra sir, do you have any points to contribute?
Kanika, is there any question? I don't find any question in the QA box. Or maybe in the chat, if there is some point that you want to raise and ask Himanshu sir to respond to that, or should I just raise a few issues here?
There is nothing, sir. You can.
Okay. So thank you, Himanshu ji, for such a fantabulous presentation. I mean, you really took us to those floods. I mean, you know, those heartrending scenes that we've witnessed during the Kashmir, Chennai, and of course the Kerala floods. I don't know whether this question I should ask to you or to myself, but nevertheless, I would still go ahead. You know, when we talk about climate change, and you brought in the whole question of the political will, I mean, in the Stafford Act that you mentioned, I mean, both in US and UK, if you see, I mean, there's a new Green Deal that has come up. When Trump walked out of the Paris Agreement, so there was this political pressure from the Democrats, and it became big campaign, big political issue, and eventually led to the defeat of Trump. I mean, you're aware of that. So this was like imbibed into the political stream there. Likewise, we find in the Labour Party movement, and they went even to a very fundamentalist view that those companies that do not adhere to climate change adaptability should be forbidden from trading to the stock market. I mean, that's something quite extreme that we're talking about. But these are political discourses. Now, Himanshu, why are these discourses not part and parcel, though both climate change and the question of poverty, as also rightly mentioned in one of the reports, are inextricably linked, you know? It's not that
I think,
this is left, that is right. So why these, I mean, that's the first point that I want them, because you've covered, I mean, you've covered politics, you've covered economy, you've covered environment, and all these are linked. So why these still do not happen to be, you know, mainstream political issues? And this tangent remain only for some civil society groups, you know, or some individuals. So, I mean, that's the first thing. And yeah, and the second thing I would like to share with you, and I think you rightly pointed, that's just a comment, you know, about when you spoke about unplanned urbanization. In fact, that's one of the foremost reasons, and especially what we have witnessed. I wish somebody could do a study on that. You know, the direct relationship between the projects that we have entailed under the smart cities and urban flooding to that. Because in most of these smart city projects, what we find is retro development has taken almost redevelopment, not retrofitting, has taken almost 80% of the works under smart city. And most of these works have actually destroyed the conventional contours and the conventional flows of water. I mean, water streams that were flowing in the cities, and which eventually leads to urban flooding. I mean, Patna is one example. Let me also share that I wrote the Patna climate change document, and I asked, I mean, who's the state disaster management authority? I said, sir, anyone would take a look at it? He said, forget about having a look at it. You just prepare the document. So I know it's one of the finest documents, but no one, I mean, pays heed to that. So I think that you've really rightly pointed out about the non-resilient structures that we are, and you know, this blind race for infrastructure development in the city. So yeah, I think these two comments, and maybe we'll have a few questions later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first question, if you could respond to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about one, I think, report and research that you did about the drinking water crisis in Shimla, if I'm right. Yeah. And you said that you allowed more hotels to pop up, but you never thought about from where you will give water to them. And this, I know this is just one aspect of the urban governance crisis that we face today. Disaster is just another reflection of the larger crisis we face in the cities. And remember, cities are becoming the centers of development in the sense that large chunk of new investments are now tailored towards the growing urban population that India faces. And that's where I think the challenge also becomes much bigger. I remember in the NDMA has issued reports, and they still have a conference every year, I think, on the urban disaster resilience infrastructure, which says that trillions of dollars is expected to flow into urban centers, which are becoming increasingly insecure because of misgovernance and absence of disaster governance structures in cities. One question, and I think I'm very happy that you asked, is in my life, I've covered from first election I covered was in 2001, 2002 UP Assembly elections. 2002, I went to Kashmir. And since then, I've covered all Lok Sabha elections. I don't even remember how many state assembly elections. I haven't heard a word called disaster in the election campaign. And I can tell you, and this is a kind of a raw, in a very, I would say, unscientific way of putting this before you, all of you, is that if an issue doesn't figure in the agenda of a state or a Lok Sabha elections, if an issue doesn't figure in the mainstream political discourse during an election, there is very less probability of the government actually centering its focus after the elections are over. They are largely focused on, for example, Kejriwal offered A, B, C, D, and we know that after in the first month itself, he started delivering on those promises. In Punjab, it has done the same thing. But in that way, for example, the question of pollution, Parali burning, was it an election issue in Punjab? What farmers said, okay, you withdraw that ordinance you have issued, which penalizes us. We all know what happened later. Is Parali still an issue for anyone? But we continue to suffer. Wait for November, December. We will again suffer this year. So the question of political will that you said, this is reflected also in the case of disasters. To put it funnily, in my Ignite State presentation at the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, I quoted a quote of Lalu Yadav, who was in power at that time. And Ganga had actually overflown, and he, of course, was in power. Nitish Kumar was chief minister. And I remember as that video became viral, he went to a poor man's house whose kacha home was flooded. There was still water inside the house. And the family was crying that we have lost everything. And what did Lalu Yadav say? He said, Ganga Maya khud chal ke tumhare ghar pe aayi. Ganga jal lene ke liye log America, England se yahan pe aate. और गंगा मैया खुद चल के तुम्हारे को ब्लेस करने के लिए यहाँ पे आई है। तुम रोते हो, ये तो डिसरेस्पेक्ट हो गया गॉड का। And the family didn't know what to tell him. So I think it is still somewhere the political elite, especially at the local state level, they still look at it from the prism of God's wrath. And that is one reason. I remember when I first went to make a presentation in JNU in November 2014, I was stunned that this was the first conference on disasters in JNU. And I can tell you that Shivraj Patil sir gave me an interview before the disaster management bill was made public for debate and inputs from stakeholders after the tsunami incident of 2004. And I remember after that interview, I did the story that from 1947 till 2005, why no government thought of a disaster management act? Was there no monsoon? There is something missing in our national consciousness. And this is the point I think you made. Unfortunately, a lot has changed, sir, since I started doing research on disaster. I'm very happy that, every week, every second week, there is an interaction like this happening, brainstorming happening. This is creating awareness. This is creating more opportunities for people to even study disaster. JNU has a special center for disaster research, which was set up by Dr. Amita Singh. Before that, there was no platform for anyone to even study disaster. IT Roorkee had a center, but that is largely from the technological point of view. But, this is where you have to create a new generation of students who are interested in sustainability, disaster research. Then only the discourse can be created. Remember, we ignored disasters till the tsunami hit India very badly in 2004. Before that, no one thought of a disaster law. Even when the pandemic came, for example, is another instance of the fact that we have ignored the threat that a pandemic poses to a country like us. 1918 Spanish flu, British researchers say 14 to 17 million Indians died during Spanish flu. Gandhiji had also contracted Spanish flu. But when the medical workers started getting attacked in different parts of India, Cabinet had to take out the 1897 Epidemic Act to empower the police and incorporate penal and provisions in the law that if you attack a hospital or a medical practitioner, this is the fine that you'll have to face, this is the jail term that you'll have to face, this is the penalty you'll have to face. Because we never had a country which lost 14 to 17 million of its citizens in 1918. For 100 years, it never thought of having a pandemic law, epidemic law. The coveralls. I remember we were told 99% coverall to import hota. So they said, okay, aap mask pehniye, gamcha pehniye, 2 gaj ki duri lagi hai. We know, and by June, July, we started getting data that India has become the second largest exporter of coveralls. Because every tailor in every street and road had started stitching a mask. There was always a potential, but we never thought about it because there was no one to tell them that, okay, this is a big market. Tailors बोल रहे थे, अरे आप 25 रुपए की मास्क खरीदते हैं मोर शॉप में, मैं आपको 10 रुपए में दे दूंगा. इतना कपड़ा तो मेरे पास ही पड़ा हुआ. And we know that it cropped up everywhere, these mask shops. So, we always have, we have ignored the threat that whether it is a public health disaster or a climate-related disaster. I think this is a learning curve, but I'm very happy, Tikendra sir, that we have moved far, far ahead. And we're actually doing what we should have done in 1947. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Kanika, can you take the two questions? I can see the two questions in the box.
Yes, sir. Before that, Dr. Vandana Tyagi had raised her hand. Ma'am, would you like to ask any questions? Vandana, ma'am? Okay, so I think we will move on to the questions. Mohua Tripathi ji has asked, wanted to know what is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the fund allocations for natural disasters?
No, allocation for disasters is done under a different provision. It is nothing to do with any other pandemic or anything. This is a separate allocation which is done, and the 16th Finance Commission, of course, allocates funds to different government departments for different work, and so I think there is no direct impact in the sense that, you see, remember, disasters. The government of India is empowered to issue as many funds as is required. We don't know if a disaster 2 months later will cause losses at which scale. So I think you can't make a preemptive allocation of funds. We do know that under the NDRF and SDRF, there are funds allocated to states as per the Finance Commission recommendations. But I think government actually has a very open mind, and we have seen that whether it is a cyclone Amphan or any other cyclone on the western side of India, large allocations have been made by the central government. So I think it's a case-by-case allocation of funds for disasters. There is no one fixed amount that, okay, this is like in the case of Manrega, for example. Even in the budget, the allocation that were made, we saw that during the COVID-19 phase, government increased it significantly. So I think the fund allocation is depending on the needs and requirements of people. And we have seen government, they have a very flexible approach, not only for disaster, for any other quantum of work that needs to be done in a given area. And there is a procedure. For example, if there's a drought in some part of India, there's a central and a state team which goes there. It is an interministerial team. It comes back, it submits its report before the government of India, assessments are made, and then the allocations are made. So I think this is where government has a very flexible approach, and there is no fixed amount of fund for disasters.
Other question which has been asked by Shakunji is, how can we make the marginalized communities more aware and resourceful for the same? A similar question has also been asked by Chaitanya ji as well, sir. How do we make the marginalized more resilient?
Because, we have to sensitize them. This is part of what we need to do in the pre-disaster phase. Disaster management cycle has largely three components. There's a pre-disaster phase, there's a disaster phase, and there's a post-disaster phase. I think we need to weave in communities who are living in disaster-prone areas and include them in our disaster mitigation strategies. That would essentially mean you sensitize them to the dangers that disaster pose to their life, to their livelihood. That also means that you also empower them, because remember, whenever a disaster incident happens, the first responder is the community. So it's the more we train our communities, and especially the marginalized people who are living on vulnerable land, which are largely more disaster prone than other lands, then I think we will be in a better position. They will be better equipped to actually face such disasters. In the case of Kashmir, I can just want to make one point that I do know many soldiers who were involved in disaster relief work told me that there were floods. Every second, third home in Srinagar was flooded. And there were many people who were refusing to move out of their flooded homes. And they had a very poor understanding of the threat that they were posing by remaining in their flooded homes. So when the soldiers would go to them, they will say, no, we don't come out of our home. We don't know where you will take us. So we want to be in the home itself. And many of these homes which were weak, they collapsed because the water had got stagnated. It had remained stagnant for 15, 16 days. And many of these houses collapsed and many people died because of a very poor understanding that they should have left their flooded homes the moment they got the first opportunity. But they didn't do it because there was no sensitization. There was no awareness of the threat that flood water can pose to their homes. So they said, no, we're feeling safe. We are on the stair now, living on the terrace. and or on the staircase, but we have taken our belongings from the first floor to the second floor, and we have food in the house. We don't leave our home. So that was a very poor understanding of how a disaster can actually affect a family which is living in a flooded home. So it's these simple things that you have to just vacate your house the moment your house gets flooded. This is something that needs to be told, people need to be educated, and we see this happening. I remember every week we get inputs that NDMA or any state disaster management authority has launched a disaster sensitive campaign in schools. Retrofitting is being done. So this is a work in progress, and I think we need to do it more actively, especially in the coastal areas which are becoming more vulnerable to cyclones.
Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, sir, and for taking out your time for enlightening us. Next, we have Dr. Shweta Vaidyadas, consultant NIDM, for sharing her short presentation.
Thank you so much, Karnika. Can you please give me the rights for sharing my screen?
Yes, it's on.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes.
And is my PPT moving?
Yes.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll just give you a glance of some of the ideas about what we can do to make our cities resilient. So for that, we have to understand the basic fact first that the disasters that we are facing, maybe we cannot, reduce the intensities or reduce the frequency, but only thing we can do is we can arm ourselves. So for that, we have to understand that whatever disaster increase is there in today's world is mostly because of the climate change. And it is almost, an accepted fact. It is accepted worldwide that this is the true story, that climate change is having a lot of impact on the intensity and the frequency of the disasters. Therefore, we can, make ourselves more resilient to, reduce the impact on us. Be it climate change, be it disaster management. So I'll take you through, some of the ideas when I will be walking you through the slides, that what exactly we can do, or what are the steps that we can take in our cities, which will be, helping us towards, adaptation. So the basic idea is assessing the current development of the cities. Then you find out the gap areas, where are the gap areas, and then you plan for the future. And then after the plan is accepted, then you implement those strategies. So this is the very basic idea, how we go about for any of the planning. Now, let me tell you about what all things could be done, without using much of the resources, or in very, normal way. So first thing is green roof. So green roof contains two things. First is solar panels, and second is the greening of the roofs or the roof gardens. So we all know that in all city areas we are having, long towers, and very less space is left for greening on the surface. Therefore, we can use the roofs of the buildings, even the walls of the buildings, for gardening, so that it helps us reduce the heat, and that can also help you to come out of the urban heat island problem. And solar panels, of course, this is the green option for energy. So when you are going for the solar panels, you will be reducing your consumption from the consumption of the energy that you get from coal, or that you get from other energy resources. or I will say the non-renewable sources. So basically we'll be enabling ourselves to use more of renewable resources, or will be using more green energy. So while doing this roof gardening or wall gardening, we must remember that most of the things what we see now everywhere, be it metro pillars or be it any of the common spaces, like it used to be there in the ministry buildings also, we are using plastic pots for growing some of the very small plants. But that should not be the case, because if we are using plastics, then again we are introducing other problems. And also that doesn't cool at all, because it also becomes very hot, and that those small plants also doesn't help much, and most of them dry due to sun rays and all. So we have to think of proper plants and proper plantation procedure which can help us reduce the heat. This is the first thing. Then we have to make our urban hubs sustainable. So in now in India, in most of the metro cities, urban hubs are there, like in Chennai, in Bangalore, Kolkata, Hyderabad or Delhi. Wherever you are going, you will see urban hubs, even in Jaipur. So we have to take care of few things, that we have to make these lands sustainable or self-sufficient. Because if you can make sure that you have your own food, you have your own water and recreation and efficient transportation system, then that itself reduces energy consumption. Because if you are not self-sufficient, then you need to wait for the things to come from a far distance. Suppose you are procuring your vegetables or your daily needs from other state, then that has to come, or even if not other state, even if it is from far away place, then that itself will consume a lot of oil through the transportation, and that will increase the air pollution. Therefore, if you want to reduce the air pollution, then you must rely on yourself. You have to make sure that you are self-sufficient, you are growing your own vegetables or your daily needs things in a nearby place, so that you reduce the pollution which you normally create through the transportation. So this is very important, because through whomsoever is residing in Delhi, that how much pollution every year we are going through, especially in the winter season. And Parali and all, we can't really do much, even government is not able to do. So let us not go into that, but what is possible from our side, we can do that, right? So we have to think of that. Second thing is rainwater cleansing. That means that you have to make your gardens rain absorbent. Then whatever rain is coming, either you are storing that rainwater, we call it harvesting, rainwater harvesting, through pipes or through other means. And also we have to remember that we have to make our city a sponge city. So China has a very innovative, I won't say, but it is a very important goal that they have set, that they want to make 80% of their land to be a sponge by 2030. So that same concept we can also think of. By telling sponge city, I mean that your open spaces that should be rainwater absorbent. So that helps you in many ways. First of all, if you have any wetland like lakes or ponds or some water bodies, that is a very good place which can absorb the rainwater, and that can also save you from the urban flood. Because whenever any extra water is that due to heavy incessant rain, or due to a rain in a very short period of time, if you get enormous rain within a very short period of time, that itself causes the urban flood, because you do not have a proper place for rainwater drainage. We do not have that, and we must think of doing that rainwater drainage, because every big city except in India, they have such stormwater drainage system. If you remember, when Kalpana Chawla she landed her, spaceship, that also was one that similar kind of rainwater or stormwater drainage space. So there itself she landed. But we do not have any such kind of thing, not for landing, spaceships, but for, draining out your rainwater. So it is very much needed. Also, if you have barren space which is not cemented or which is containing some kind of green cover, that itself is very good for rain water infiltration through to your ground. Because why infiltration is important? Because if you do not capture the rainwater within below the surface, then it will go off as a surface flow. So when it goes off as a surface flow, then what happens is, then more soil erosion will be there, and finally the infiltration will be less, and slowly your groundwater conservation will be limited, because more you cement your upper land, then your groundwater table will go down day by day. So if you increase the infiltration by any means, then through percolation, it will ultimately enrich your water table. So that helps you a lot. Then, you have to think of the social transit, high-speed rails, or basically the transportation should be dependent on the green energy or renewable energy, not on the, oil or some other thing. That is the idea. Then with the help of hydroponic technology, definitely you can do the urban farming, because that will help you grow more things in a very small space and with a very less amount of water. Then the walls of the buildings, very well if the tall towers are there, and which are the sides which gets solar heat and solar light for the entire day, that so on that walls you can always fix the solar panels, so that your entire building is dependent on that solar energy. So that is a very good option. Even the solar panels could be planted on the windows as well, because normally for the office buildings and all, we do not open the windows much, so we can use that space. So when we are planning for any of the city, we should always maintain the height of the building. So we have to adjust in a way that some of the buildings will be of higher elevation and some of the buildings will be of lower elevation. So this mix of low rise and high rise will help the flow of free air, which will keep you healthy and which will help to maintain the oxygen level and all. Then we can always think of the green streets. So green streets are very important. So if you have seen in Noida and all, you will see that most of the roads, those are covered with trees on the both of the sides. So that helps a lot, because that definitely, wherever trees are there, that will help you in many ways. So that helps you in increased infiltration, that helps you in keeping your place cooler, that gives you more oxygen, that reduces the pollution. So many benefits. And along with that, if you think that we will be using the street lights, those will use only the green energy. So street lights can be run on the solar panels. So that is very helpful when you are not using any non-renewable energy. Also, whenever you are thinking of greening your roadsides, you should always think of using native species of the trees. Why native species? Because the native species doesn't need much care, doesn't need much water, and doesn't need much fertilizer. So if you are thinking that, okay, I have seen some flower in Japan and that looks really great, and I want that to be planted on my roadside, it's good, but then it doesn't help you much, because you need to take a lot of care with water, fertilizer, and so many things. But if you use some native species, then that doesn't take much of these cares. So these are the things which we can think. And if you are thinking of green streets, then both of the sides will be non-cemented, or it will be left as it is. So that itself is a very good place for rainwater infiltration. So that works as sponge. So that is most important.
Smita ma'am, please do hurry up.
Yes. So when we are thinking of buildings, then we can think of shared spaces and amenities. Like we should not think of that all of us will use some more car. I mean, each person will use 2-3 cars or so. So we can use single car for the family, or we can use the public transport. That helps reduce the pollution. And then whenever we are planning for the cities, we have to think of inclusiveness. Inclusiveness means whenever you are planning, you have to think of the person with disability. You have to think of the children, because in disaster time, these people are the most vulnerable, maybe the pregnant woman or the children or the a person with disability. So these are the things, though nowadays we talk about 8R policy, but mostly we should think of at least basic 3 Rs, that is reduce, reuse and recycle. These helps a lot. And also we can think of drone commuting in future, because now already we have started placing orders, not placing orders, but delivering orders with drones in some of the places. So we can think of carrying out people for office and all through drone. And then underground farming is also an option which we can think for urban spaces. That helps a lot. And along with that, wetland restoration is really very important. So I'll stop here today since we are running out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Das, Shweta Das, for your detailed presentation. Now we go for our last expert session for today. We are pleased to have our distinguished expert, Dr. Madhu Verma, Chief Economist, World Resource Institute, New Delhi. Welcome, ma'am. Without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me for this very important, very interesting program. Just a second. Let me just share my screen and I'll just carry forward. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. It's on.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I was listening to all the conversations for the last 2 sessions. Quite a knowledge gain for me as well, besides making my own little contribution to this program. Well, I mean, a lot of discussion has happened regarding the technical interventions, the legal aspects, taking it forward to support various support systems. What also I would say is essentially required to make this kind of intervention popular and acceptable across, because it is such an important aspect to look at the plight of cities, because there was so much of concentration of work on rural areas definitely in the country for a long time. We realized that many interventions are required, very timely, very urgently required. Rather, we have to go for mission mode to save our cities, which have been such thriving spaces, had enriched biodiversity, enriched system. What the last presentation talked about, the sponge function of cities were very much existent. But gradually, the all natural spaces come into concretized spaces, and we face the fury of floods and disasters. Many more things happened for that. So from my angle, I'm an ecological economist, and it's very important to also understand, manifest, express, take to the floor the value of interventions that we are making. And it is both ways. The value of damage as well as value of conservation or enhancement of an ecosystem. So my session is going to be talking more about not just technical solutions, engineering-based solutions, more about nature-based solutions for making Indian cities disaster and climate change resilient. And the approach which I'm putting it up is because I'm talking about the values, the ecological economic approach. I'm trying to measure the value of interventions which lead to enhancement or enrichment of an ecosystem, as well as when ecosystems are thriving and we depend so much on ecosystem, the economic system would also thrive. This is what my session will be all about. Let me quickly just run through 2 slides quickly about our organization. I worked all my life for 25 years, rather before that 10 years with the university, for 25 years with Indian Institute of Forest Management, where all my life we worked with nature-based solutions. We talked about conservation of forests, wetlands, rivers, land, and interventions which try to enhance the quality of ecosystems have happened. And having joined this organization almost 2.5 years ago, that's what they would like to enhance. It is the Resources Institute. World Resources Institute talks more about conservation of resources, and we have a kind of a motto: count it, change it, and scale it. So we want to count the value of interventions, how the interventions would change the system, and we would like to scale them up. That's what is the idea, definitely. We work through climate mitigation, climate resilience, energy, sustainable cities, sustainable landscape and restoration. These are the domains in which we intensively work. And we have a very strong cities program. We talk about cities for forest and electric vehicles, because and solar energy definitely immensely, which provides sort of nature-based solutions for cities to thrive, because we have had enough of engineering based and they did not do much good to us. Rather, benefits were short-term, but the damages were long-term in such interventions. And we have cross-cutting centers and research data and innovation center. And I had economic center, and besides being a chief economist of the organization, which is a common thread. You can see that arrow, which is actually a thread across these domains. We can work out economics of all such interventions. And that's what, having worked a lot with policymakers all my life, every study which I had done in my life, in my past organization, the current organization, landed up at the table of the policymakers and made a change in terms of decision-making process, introduction of some kind of interventions, economic instruments, which had changed the current paradigm to a much sustainable kind of a paradigm. A lot of literature is around for cities, because we talk about urban areas and city spaces. I happen to be part of an international system called as the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, where we talked about the valuing the ecosystems and the biodiversity, what we get from these ecosystems. It is actually called as the Stern's Review of Ecosystems and Biodiversity initially, inspired by Stern's Review on Climate Change. We talked about economics of climate change, definitely. So, but later on, it was rechristened as the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. So we did a report. I'm engaged with this project since 2007. I worked on the evaluation aspect with a couple of other experts and came out with the whole sort of a framework, a wire framework, a kind of a guide map for valuing the services that we get from ecosystems. Then it was also realized we must work for specific systems, not just so-called ecosystems, but the built systems as well. And cities came up front very much first to talk more about the cities' value which they get through the ecosystem which exist over there. So this manual came out as Team Manual for Cities on ecosystem services and urban management. We have a couple of other many such documents available, guide maps available to capture these values. Of course, it is a UN Decade of Restoration, and the last presenter also talked about recreating, reusing, reducing the consumption and the production system. And we would like to further go ahead to reimagine, recreate, and restore these ecosystems. It is the decade of UN Decade of Restoration 2021 to 2030. We have to build these ecosystems because we get so much support from them. If these ecosystems go away, we will also collapse and crash. And what else would be the best example, a better example than the pandemic, which was a disconnect which we made in the habitat of the various I would say non-human populations, and then we felt we got the fury of disturbance on us, and it is still continuing. It is not never ending. So nature takes its own toll if not cared for, the properly in due course of time. So lots of studies came out on nature-based solutions for building resilience in towns and cities, for disaster and climate resilience, making cities resilient by introducing NBS in urban planning. And we can see there's a very interesting document. This is of course a deep study came up by UN and a couple of other organizations put together, how we can make cities smart, sustainable, resilient. And the thread amongst them definitely is the IUCN framework, which came up for nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions are the solutions which are anchored around so-called nature. And because we created problems to nature, and solutions also lie in rebuilding or recreating or refurbishing nature. So they are the solutions which are actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively to provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefit. Rightly said by the last presenter that we should plant native species. Why not? Because they were naturally provided in a region, and we kept on, bringing exotic ones because they may be more beautiful looking and they may be, much more easy to, replicate. And what we led to, we had lantana as one of the exotic variety, but it is a weed now. Parthenium, many things, are damaging the system very much. But the local species are such resilient in nature. Like we're doing a big study in WRA, which I'm leading, the flagship study on, doubling farmers' income using agroecological methods, using agroecological methodology or the interventions. And we found that, at many places which are actually water deficient, but our systems were such, our policies were such which provided subsidies, and something which was scarce actually in nature, but became abundant because of the subsidy to make use of it. And they did not just use, they overuse and misuse and abuse that particular resource. So regions where actually have to have more climate resilient crops and more water resistant crops, we ended up, growing sugarcane and rice, because might be commercial benefits are much more in these crops, but we damage the soil very much. It is very important to look at these aspects when we go for urban planning. We have had, many more such interventions being made in rural areas, but urban plan also requires such interventions because they also depend a lot on these kinds of ecosystems, definitely. I come from city of Bhopal, where I lived all my life, and then I moved to Delhi, and such a connect I could see. Bhopal is a city of lakes and mountains and very green. But Bhopal also had floods once upon a time, a couple of years ago, not very far off. I think 10 years ago we had floods. Nobody could imagine a city which has got natural system of managing so-called heavy rains and floods. It all got distorted because we cemented roads, or the sponge function was gone, and city which was proud of its own lake, could not use that particular function for its own benefit, and such a damage was done. And we went on, mitigating the damage, or we went on, reprimanding the damage which had happened, and such loss happened to the economic system. So this is the reason why we focus a lot from moving away from engineering structures to, the nature-based solutions. And rightfully, the example given by the previous but last speaker talked about the tsunami. Tsunami actually triggered. It is the same way I would say, because I come from Bhopal. There was no such Environmental Protection Act in the country, but Bhopal strategy led to creation of EPA. Similarly, tsunami led to creation of all these laws for, also making, these systems, protected or take care of all these aspects in the system. So nature-based solutions are, definitely are given different names: green infrastructure, ecological infrastructure. They play a very important role in offsetting losses for climate-related disasters, which have been talked greatly about in the entire length of discussions happened since yesterday. And they contribute building resilience, because if you're having such richness of biodiversity in these regions, biodiversity means resilience, means safety nets, means as kind of a function which has much more responsiveness as compared to the very, very strict, rigid kind of systems. And through rehabilitation and expansion of natural ecosystems within built areas. Just what last presenter talked about, how to create these spaces and provide solutions for mitigating these kind of disasters and impacts which come in front of us. So we have variety of nature-based solutions. They are so-called nature-based, where we are using the functioning ecosystems for human well-being, like all the lakes, rivers, forests, which are actually existing. We want to protect them. Nature derived from low carbon energy needs from natural resources, like we go for solar and go for water-based energy systems, and then coal. Definitely that would be much more nature derived, and solarization is the key these days. Inspired innovative designs that is nature inspired. So you have the way it is mimicking nature and creating such solutions which nature would have actually provided to us, but we create artificial designs which can give us these kinds of benefits. So there's a kind of a categorization, and there's a need for NBS. NBS is just one, I would say, trigger, but it has got much larger ramifications. It's got huge, what we call in economics as multiplier effects. You make one intervention, but it leads to multiple amount of benefits to the society, definitely. So we have ecosystem restoration approaches, very much prevalent to provide solutions like ecological restoration, like forest restoration, issue-specific ecosystem-related approaches like adaptation mitigation cases, climate adaptation services, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, Infrastructure-related approaches like natural and green infrastructure. You talk about blue and green, which the diagram also shows. Infrastructure is very much prevalent. Ecosystem-based management approaches like coastal zone management and defining areas of no-go areas kind of thing in forest, and coastal line protection definitely, and water resources management in terms of using it, in a little wise way. And ecosystem protection approaches, which will be area-based conservation, which like, for example, national parks, tiger reserves, we look at the conserved habitats and, wetlands of national, international importance, river protection. So all these are kind of approaches which go a long way to help us out in, mitigating these kinds of damages. So there's a strong connect you can see in these kinds of approaches, which are ecosystem-based approaches. And they face various societal challenges, and they provide services like climate change, mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, economic and social development, because we draw so many resources from these ecosystems. Good human health, if you have so-called ecological security, you have got nutritional security, you have got food security, you have got so-called livelihood security of people, and of course ecosystem security and economic security as well. You get good food supply, you have water security, and then you are able to check environmental degradation, biodiversity losses. So when you are able to intervene, make interventions using these, you are able to enhance human well-being, and also you get lots of biodiversity benefits in exchange. Very quickly about the recent work, which talks so much about a framework of making cities smart, sustainable, resilient. So what is this? These NBS so-called has got huge power. The power is inherent. Power is invisible. In fact, I would say, which is our job, which is the ecological economist's job, to make the invisible contributions visible to the radar of policymakers and decision makers and who's it of stakeholders, the corporators, such that they understand these values and take them forward for their decision-making process for future. So they address, lots of, they can help, because it's confined to cities. They help cities address urgent and fundamental environmental challenges by bringing what we call as ecosystem services back into cities and rehabilitating cities' relationship with their surrounding areas. Talk about trees, it's not just a trunk of tree and the foliage which is important. There's huge number of functions. I'll talk about in the next slide about the functions of a tree. And there's a huge value of tree which you don't understand. It is only when you remove trees you realize what have you lost. And the shades in urban areas is one of the important functions these trees provide to you. Purification of air, habitat for many variety of so-called pollinators, birds, squirrels, butterflies, so on and so forth. And by increasing implementation of NBS, decision makers can help cities adapt to effects of climate change, because adaptation is the key to the impact of climate change. We can of course mitigate, but now it's very important to also adapt to these changes. They reduce urban heat island effects and cooling needs in building, clean air, manage water, and so on, and many, many good things happen. And as I said in the beginning, they are the only way forward to create healthy and pandemic-proof cities. Otherwise, that's what we faced. The cities had more pandemic impact than rural areas, because there's, as compared to cities, still much more environmentally friendly. They still follow nature-based solutions in their format of daily life. So what we what I said by ecosystem services, we mean to say that they are the functions which we get from an ecosystem, and we derive so much from the ecosystems, but what we give back is the so-called, we derive goods, but we give back all the bads to the ecosystem. That's what is the important thing to be understood in nature-based solutions. We are giving back to nature goods that we have extracted. Rather, you should go beyond it, what you have extracted, to maintain these systems for future. So all these benefits like pollination, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, fiber protection, recreation, slope stability, all these functions we get. We have very good examples from abroad. I'll talk about New York City's model, where the catchment is protected and the city gets pure water. In India, I'm happy to see Mayor Sir sitting here in the meeting and coordinating the entire currency of these sessions. We have great example of Shimla catchment forest, what it provides to Shimla city. Similarly, Munnar catchment, Gangtok catchment. I worked across the length and breadth of Himachal Pradesh and tried to work out the value of forests of Himachal Pradesh and how important it is to conserve these habitats, these areas and these ecosystems. Similarly, across the country, and we talked a lot about conservation of tiger reserves in the country, snow leopard habitats. They are said by the Honorable Prime Minister, they are the engine growth, they are the growth of engine in the system, not just the habitats for these population, but they provide huge amount of support systems to the economic system also. So they call as engines of economic growth than just the tiger reserves or forest of the country. These are the services which you get from any ecosystem when you conserve them. You get food, we get fiber, we get genetic resources, biochemical, fresh water. The regulating one, which are basically controlling the system, like we regulate the speed of a fan, intensity of light, speed of car, through a regulation system, which will regulate, the system of an ecosystem as well. Then the entire cycle is being maintained, like you emit carbon, but you sequester carbon, you erode lands, but you also at the same time build, lands. You impure water, make water impure, but you do purification, which is a wonderful function of, doing these kinds of fixing what we call as in the system. They are nothing but the, nature-based solutions. So they do pollination service, they regulate pests by predators. They have natural hazard, regulation because they maintain their systems. If you have a good forest, it controls flooding, it controls erosion, it controls all such disasters definitely. And we have all examples around putting what happened in Uttarakhand, what happened in Chennai, what happened in Bangalore, what happened in Bhopal, and many more cities in Delhi as well. They are the examples of such disasters. But if you maintain these ecosystems, disasters can definitely be averted. And we don't realize that's what my job is, or all ecological economists' job is, to put in front the value of these kinds of interventions. Kind of costs that you have to pay by not mitigating these damages on time, not conserving these habitats, not protecting these habitats, huge costs go into system, which we are happily paying. But we don't make an effort to invest in these systems. So I worked on these issues and try to work out just as you invest in physical capital in constructing buildings, roads, networks, social capital, creating networks, human capital like this, the training program to build your knowledge, the financial capital to invest in certain ventures to multiply your returns. We don't bother about investing in natural capital. Nature is also like a capital. You invest something, you get multiple times returns. It's just, I say a song of a film, tum ek paisa doge, wo 10 lakh dega. That's what, we worked out in our all studies and proved. And for example, a study for tiger conservation or tiger habitat conservation in the country, we proved what they provide to the country. And that led to, besides a couple of other initiatives which the department and NTC have taken to increase number of tiger habitats, to increase investment in tiger habitats. Because you invest ₹1, we prove investing ₹1, for example, a Sundarban tiger habitat, which provides such a wonderful function of, fixing the entire wastage, municipal waste of Calcutta city. So it's a huge, it provides 550 times the initial amount of investment in terms of ecosystem services provisioning. So that's what is the focus here. Similarly, for cultural services, I take pride in saying that I come from city of lakes and mountains. So this is kind of a relationship you built. We have sacred forests, sacred rivers, sacred groves, sacred, animals. So this is how we protect our nature. This is a nature-based solution. Areas which are sacred are naturally getting protected. We have a good example of Mawphlung Forest if you have happened to have been at this site in Meghalaya, which is the largest sacred grove in the world. And you don't know what you provided quietly to the system, because if you look at this adjoining area, it is like a punk cut. At the head top, you have got dense forest, and the adjoining area is denuded because of religious values, spiritual values, sanctions as well protected that forest and provided such huge amount of function to downstream areas through watershed protection, through conservation, through many more such effects which happen in the system. That's what we do through cultural services. But at the backstage function is given by so-called the supporting services. Unless you build soil, nothing would happen. So you have primary production function, nutrient cycling, you have got soil structure building, primary production, which provides support to the system. Just a quick example, this can be any forest, not just talking about cities forest. This is cutting that tends to be related to cities. You look at if you are able to protect, for example, rich forest of Delhi and then Bhopal forest and all forest of all cities together, Bangalore, Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, many such places. They provide huge number of functions. Not just they provide you trunk and a shade, or at the most you can understand that the animal, also the birds will be having their nest over there, but they provide such a wonderful function of providing, soil formation, water conservation, pest management, biological regulation, seed dispersal, soil fertility, water sharing, net primary productivity, watershed function, food security, ecological security, biodiversity, because this diversity is immense in these trees definitely. And we connect it strongly to SDGs through these ecosystem services. By 2030, we have to achieve that target as well. And we can see these ecosystem services are the means of achieving sustainable development goals in future. This is a kind of a interesting mapping of nature-based solutions across various ecosystems, which provide resilience to multiple climate hazards. This WRI's work in a report of Global Commission for Adaptation in 2019. Now just look at this particular block or a column, which talks about urban areas, the cities or the urban spaces, hazardous urban flooding due to intense rainfall. Solution is restore water courses, expand green spaces, introduce porous surfaces to reduce flood risk. We just were talked about in the last session, last presentation. Hazardous heat stress due to urban heat islands. Solutions expand green spaces in and around cities. So it is not just, so we talk in terms of landscape approach, not just you look at this particular pinpointed a site to provide solutions, because you might realize the problem lies elsewhere, not just at this particular site. For example, I did a big study for Bhopal's lakes, did a kind of water resource-based modeling, and also did evaluation exercise. I'll quickly show you in the end this particular intervention, and found that the problem did not lie much in the cities. So there was a problem of flow of cities waste into the lake's water body, which is actually polluting the lake very much. The major problem lied, in the rural spaces, because the two-thirds of the lake's area is rural catchment where the inorganic cultivation is happening, and the area is getting, supplying the gradient was such which led to flow of the entire, nutrient load to the lake, and lake was heavily polluted. So this is how we provide, similarly for farmlands, rivers and wetlands. NMCG is taking it forward greatly in their River Cities program, which we trying to help to work out ecosystem services contribution of these interventions for the city's population, definitely. So this is how the economics goes. We look at identified ecosystem services. This is the structure of what I said about the TEEB report for cities. So we will try to work out the economics of NBS. If we are introducing NBS, we must demonstrate what they provide to you. There's an interesting slogan given by TEEB, is measuring what we manage. We are managing cities. This kind of interventions, we must measure the value of intervention, because this is, whether you like it or not, ultimately things convert into so-called monetary value, which not always monetary. We also use qualitative expression, but that's what people look at: the cost part, benefit part, what goes in terms of stakeholders' contribution, how much everybody derives and the economy derives is an important aspect. So we do ecosystem service identification, because they help people's health, jobs, and safety. We do evaluation exercise by using n number of multiple techniques of evaluation. A quick example of hedonic pricing technique, where we worked out the value of houses located in front of the Bhopal's lake, how the waterscape value of lake gets embedded in the value of the property prices of those houses, maybe the rental value of the property prices themselves. There's no such market which talks about these values directly, but when you start selling these properties, these values get embedded. You go to a hotel, we might look at the lake facing room, it might cost very high as compared to a similar room, else which don't get any view at all. So that's what is the valuation is all about. Then taking it forward in a structured system of UN called environmental accounting to show that this is a contribution that so-called interventions are making, and ultimately creating a system of incentivizing people, or paying those populations or the groups, communities which are providing these solutions in the system. A quick example of salmon credits in US, where the people who are conserving the habitats of salmon are being compensated for their initiatives. There's a system of environmental credit accounting where you actually measure through a calculus what interventions they have made, what it led to in terms of many such indicators are there. You bring it to the board and then do estimation and get a value, which is, if it is above the certain value, which shows a good habitat of salmon, you get credit points earned, just as we estimate carbon credits. And there's a Bureau of Environmental Services in Portland. I did my Fulbright there, so I happened to have a personal introspection and had seen how this kind of process is happening, and very much keen to establish a system in India as well. And you go to this bureau with this certification, and the bureau encashes your credit points. So these kind of interventions are very much required in our own country. Very quick run through examples, international and national examples. I think 10 or 15 minutes more to finish my presentation. It is making conservation profitable in New York City. It is a watershed steward program. It's one of the classic examples, the first such initiative in the world where the catchments are protected because you worked out an economics in the sense that that Delaware and Catskill are two watersheds from where New York City gets its water supply. And forests constitute 75% of area in these watersheds, but there was a lot of, because people own forests in America, unlike India, where you don't own forests personally, but you can own forest in US. So, but they were protecting forests. At the same time, they were to pay a property tax for owning a property. There's a forest or built property, you have to pay a tax. Discouraged by that, people started converting those forests into agricultural lands, ranches, and huge amount of cultivation happened, and their ranches also used a lot of inorganic inputs. And since it was in the catchment, the catchment flow led to flow of these nutrients to the water body reservoir, where water was getting collected for supplying to the city of New York, to the city of New York. So people realized this is not done, and you must make some kind of changes in the system. So they had two kind of options to correct the problem in 1997. First was to either invest in a filtration plant costing US $6 to $8 billion with annual O&M cost of $300 to $500 million. Second option was to invest $1 to $1.5 billion in the improvement of the catchment of the watershed. They were reducing the pollution at the source. So they found second to be much more economical option. They did a huge amount of consultation, capacity building, switching from inorganic to organic, buying land to do a lot of plantation. And ultimately, so happened that the original form of water quality was restored. So city chose the second one, as I said, and they did by improving soil, water conservation, and a lot of capacity building. And until date, New York City is the one which gets water. There's no water treatment plant. They get a pure water which you collect from the catchment is supplied because it is pure. No such interference happens, in terms of human interference. Same kind of model we tried establishing in Madhya Pradesh and Bhopal city, and of course you have a Shimla catchment, in Munnar catchment, Gangtok catchment, but we haven't worked out a mechanism where you pay back to the people who are engaged in kind of a conservation system. Similarly, another nature-based solution which is prevalent in Kampala, wetland close to city, supporting the activities of slum dwellers. They're using the national water purification function and treatment and supporting function to support small-scale income activities of slum dwellers. The system provides, which is like you can see, is a SWAM equal to $1 million to $1.75 million worth of, natural cleansing system to the city of Kampala. Otherwise, would have been very, very expensive to treat this kind of amount of pollution. So if the swamp is converted into additional investment into a sewage treatment plant, would have been very, very expensive for city to actually bear. So this is a city in Kampala which designed this kind of a green belt zone, which the city's waste is being treated. That's what I give an example of Sundarban's Tiger Reserve, which treats Calcutta city's waste, converts into useful form, and but Calcutta city is getting this particular function free of charge by Sundarban Tiger Reserve. Another kind of very interesting model which we used in my study of Finance Commission, which I worked for last 3 Finance Commissions with the Ministry of Environment and Forest while in IFM. It is a kind of incentivizing people who are, look at this city. These are 2 municipalities in Parana and Minas Gerais in Brazil, which talks about how people are committed to protecting forests and other biological resources. So they had a whole kind of a system of kind of a calculus to work out the conservation efforts by the populations in terms of biodiversity, conservation coefficients, and the variety of trees and plants and animals are there. How they've improved the sanitation and a function, the treatment of solid waste, and like that, the way roads are built, shades are being created, and you have a natural response function available. The whole kind of calculus is available, and they get a compensation in terms of ecological value added tax. You are adding ecological value to the system, which helps economic system to thrive. And from the indirect, pool of taxes, they get an amount based upon the units that they provided in terms of conservation units to the system. Similarly, a very interesting example of Satyoma landscape paddy fields in Japan, where you maintain the natural system, which is close to the city. It is a peri-urban example, where by maintaining them in a form, it used to be inorganic cultivation area. They gradually, and that led to, there used to be lots of, white swans or stork habitating in that area. But the moment it got into inorganic cultivation, the population dwindled because this poison was also going into their bodies, and then they realized that this is doing not good, for the system, and they definitely the birds passed away, flocked away from the region. But the moment they gradually turned into, organic, and then also did a lot of, sort of plantation around these rice fields and able to restore water in its pure form, the store population started increasing, and the natural, pest control happened. There was no such insecticide was used, a pesticide was used, no, even fertilizer was used, because the droppings were used as a fertilizer. They became fertilizer to the sites, and they picked up these pests naturally, and it is an organic farming in a farmed area. And so the population went up tremendously, what used to be dwindled immensely in those years. And the rice is, premiumly priced as Satyuma rice. It's premiumly priced in the market, and huge amount of money came back to municipal income, which is further invested back in these areas, and the areas expanded also. From 2013, it became much more area, and the habitat of whitestock also went up considerably. Quickly coming back to my last few slides of the study which we had done, Wetlands of Bhopal City. It is a project funded by World Bank. It is an old study, but I still find it so relevant to be presented and shared with you. So it is a lake, which has got 370 square kilometers of the catchment area, and 31 square kilometers of water spread area, and it's 40% of population depends on water supply from this particular lake. Look at the plight of lake. This shows your policy failure, institutional failure, market failure happening in the city. I'm talking about many years, almost 20 years ago when the study was done. So there was huge, because nutrient load was high from the city's sewage flowing into it, and also you're getting a lot of nutrient load from the rural catchment. It is a breeding ground, and first of all, look at the growth of water hyacinth in the upper lake. It does a wonderful function of sequestering nutrient load, but definitely it also covers up the water body, sucks the water, evaporates water, and this lake is used for drinking water purposes. But it's just not cultivation, and then definitely a lot of sewage flowing into it is leading to this. But intervention was made through a project which came into being through JBIC support to clean this lake and restore the original water quality, which had gone down tremendously to sea level, which was used to be A many years ago. So we wanted to assess the value of interventions being made. We used a couple of methods called as direct evaluation, cost of illness, because we realized that there's a huge cases being reported by people using lake's water. The stomach upset cases and diarrhea was very much prevalent, and also huge loss of nutrients in the water, because especially calcium and many other nutrients, and because water was to be purified hugely to make it potable. And then contingent valuation, how people are willing to pay for conserving this particular lake in future. And hedonic pricing, which I talked about, how the value of waterscape gets embedded into or gets built up in the value of property prices in the city of Lake. Some of the values which we got from that, definitely. There's a huge value of drinking water supply, because what you get is subsidized rate at which you get water supply, but the value of supply is much more than this. And plus the cost of purification which goes into being. The stakeholders earning revenue, the MP tourism department, there's income earned by fishermen population, the boatman population, the trapper cultivators. So huge support is given by this lake to the population, but not much was given back to the system. So we conducted a survey, worked out options for making a payment towards the loan which has come from the government in terms of maybe a voluntary payment, or if your tax is being imposed on that, what would happen. So this is how we try to build into the system these values, and suggestions were given for. And it led to ultimately creation of an institutional system called Lake Conservation Authority to maintain this lake for for sustainable purposes in future, and how we can create some instruments and systems to nature-based solutions to to correct these damages which are being done, and then definitely we can sustain the system for long term. So ultimately, the crux of the entire discussion, I would say, it is very important. We have manifested. The world has manifested the importance of nature-based solutions for providing and to avoid disasters, to make these cities more climate resilient. And we should build in this kind of a system in our urban planning, in policy, in development, definitely. And these are the ones which are much more cost-effective. They are no regret options. They're very cost-effective options. And not just to provide one function, maybe you plant tree for the sake of maybe giving you foliage, but it just gives you any number of functions at the same time. You create a sponge function, and what does it give you? Not just water table goes up, but so many other functions also come into it. The soil also gets built because you have greened that topsoil, and then you are able to maintain soil future purposes definitely. So what is required is to enhance the importance of nature-based solutions in the system. It should be built into our planning process. That's what, rightly the title of the entire workshop says, that we have to look at how we can make the disasters and cities averted or resilient or proof from disasters and climate change, and make planning in a way, do planning in a way which is much more effective and much more useful for us in long run at the same time. But unless we demonstrably value these interventions, nobody will listen to us. That's what is my job, is to work out the value of contribution to nature-based solutions. We are going in a big way in the WRI also. And in fact, I'm attending a program in Oxford, which is the nature-based solutions organization, which is that, it is a consortium of organization. We're talking more about interventions in agriculture right now. But of course, we are working across forests, wetlands, rivers, and all such ecosystems, definitely. And then taking this forward in our so-called accounting system, show that in our GDP, how much these nature-based solutions contribute. And then, of course, to make them sustained in future, we must have increased financing for nature-based solutions. So I did a case, first built a case for forest, argued with the government to provide much more funding to the states which are mandated, like, for example, Himachal Pradesh, to maintain their large cover. Sort of the area should be under forest and tree cover, because they're strategically located states, they are hill states. But look at the contribution, the amount we're getting for budget. It is minuscule. Not even 1 to 2% of budget goes for forest conservation. We have a huge target in front of us to maintain 33% of area under forest and tree cover. The budgets are minuscule. So we made this case and succeeded in getting huge amount of allocation of initially grant, and now they've built into their formula that 10% of total pool of divisible taxes should go for forestry sector conservation. And then introduction of incentive-based mechanisms for nature-based solutions, incentivizing communities, groups, populations, governments, organizations which are engaged in maintaining these areas, by making interventions which are nature-based in nature-based definitely. And they provide huge amount of solution, not just, for it may be having one objective, but what we get is gamut of benefits. So the whole bundle of benefits get created when we make one nature-based solution in the system, and the economy, the ecosystems thrive. When ecosystems thrive, economic system will definitely thrive, and we can be sustainable in future and be very, very cost effective, because we are following nature-based solutions as our interventions. So thank you very much. This is my presentation all about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful presentation and feedbacks. Tikendra sir, would you like to add any points and comments?
Thank you, Dr. Madhu Verma. It was really fascinating to watch you. And, when you were speaking about nature-based solutions, actually this reminds me of a very interesting and fascinating book written exactly 6 decades ago by Ian McCart, Designing with Nature. So yeah, that's I mean, the book speaks exactly what you're saying. But yeah, it was written 6 decades ago. Still, we're still grappling with the truth, how we have to. Yeah, we design. We require nature-based solutions. We have, the whole concept of designing with nature. So we are still designing with nature. Maybe it's nature, or man-created nature. The class typologies that we build. So yeah, for our infrastructure. But yeah, it's fascinating. Just 2 more issues I want to raise, Dr. Madhu. The first is, I'm so glad you brought some perspective about Himachal, and with WRI. I think this is the time when we really have to push forward and kind of bargain with the multilateral institutions also when we speak about nature-based solutions. But because take for example, Himachal Pradesh, I think the World Bank is investing almost 30,000 crore rupees in widening of roads. That's not what is required there. I think it's high time we get back to them that, look, hey, what we require is more ecological, and these are the most ecologically fragile zones. Okay, the Himalayas, the youngest range of mountains. And if this huge investment comes in the form of infrastructure development, and it's not even for the native population development, it's more, the large guzzlers entering, not even sustainable tourism. They come in the morning, go back to the plains in the evening. So I think, I just wanted to flag that issue. And this huge investment, this huge money comes from these multilateral institutions. And since you come from the political economy background, so you jolly well know, I mean, what is the reason for that. The third thing, which is a kind of provocation to you, which I would like you to, and this idea emanated from one of the exhibitions that was organized by the cycle manufacturers of our country. And this idea I floated to them. I asked them, why should you not float a consortium that assists and helps the cities in at least creating their mobility plans and for their own interests. And can WRI be a partner to that, or maybe a facilitator?
Yeah.
In the sense, even if we target, say, half a dozen cities. So there is a bunch of cycle manufacturers who are willing to invest something and say, okay, let's design your streets. Let's design your streets for the bicycle riders. Okay, and then so you know so designing, and even if that could be materialized in the form of infrastructure development. So I think because the city governments or the municipal corporations are still grappling with some of the basic issues, solid waste management, infrastructure, and still the drive comes from the very elite, the middle and the upper middle class, who constitute not more than 15–16%, but then they want to have the largest space in the cities by flyovers and widening of roads and all. So maybe if that could be one of the areas where we can work together, so that we can bring in one set of people, and of course they have their own economic interest, because more bicycles means more sales, and it will also mean more nature-based solutions where mobility happens to be one of the important areas. So yeah, I think these three issues. But yeah, I mean,
Sure.
it was really interesting, and I mean, Ian McCarthy, you brought Ian McCarthy back to life. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very good suggestions, and definitely WRI works a lot. I said in the beginning, a very strong team of cities, very strong cities program and transport program. This is how WRI got established through this program only, and they work a lot in big cities like in Bombay right now, working in Bangalore and a couple of other cities to make these roads much more safer for pedestrians, for cyclists. But it is going on. And really need to go across the country in a little mission more, and good connect you try to make through cycling manufacturing companies, because they will get their business if the cycling paths are there. We have lost the view of people cycling in. Now I live in Delhi, I hardly see a cycle. It is so dangerous to actually ride a bicycle unless the street is identified and made. But if you go to any other city in Europe and America, you have these streets defined, these streets defined, and people ride. And it gives you not just saves your fuel, it is a huge health benefit you get out on account of it. So I think, yeah, definitely I'll take it forward with our team, and we'll try to see if we can tie up with that. And we'll have you also in the loop to help us out. And let's create a kind of a consortium for doing that. Definitely. Yeah, thank you.
So Karnika, can you take the questions? Because there are 4 questions I can see in the QA chat.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Ma'am, you have a few questions from our panelists. Amrita ji has asked, could you please elaborate on NBS for pandemic-free cities and any such case study or example which has been implemented?
Well, we wrote a piece when this pandemic happened and tried to connect with the whole zoonotic linkage. And it said it all started from New York City Zoo, where the tiger was found infected by this disease, and how it got spread to some extent and got controlled at the same time. So the idea here is it is a habitat problem. It is a habitat issue. All of us, whether animals or human population, have got lots of viruses in our body, but they are dormant viruses. It's only when you're tempered with them, you play with them sometimes wrongly, and they manifest, they come out, and we know what toll they have taken on account of that. So that's what happened here. And interestingly, I must also mention there's going to be an interesting film soon launched called as Tigers of Bhopal City. Tiger. Otherwise, if you go to a national park, view a tiger, it's a mesmerizing experience to see a tiger in wild. But if you face a tiger in front of you on a road, close to your habitat, you will be very scared. And in Bhopal City, many locations have come up, as rightly Prabhasa was saying, like building roads, building houses. You disturb their habitats and you build your habitats. So if somebody encroaches upon our habitat, how will we feel? he'll retaliate some way or the other. That's what happened. And not just we encroached upon the habitat, we started killing these animals and started eating them. And through that, this kind of virus came into being. So this is what is to be understood. Now we have so many variants coming up. Like it was said to have come from bats, and then now we have got a monkey virus, which is getting prevalent. So this is what, because we disturb the habitat of these populations, everybody has its own zone of influence, its zone to live. Tiger needs his own space, monkeys own their own space. Their food is gone, because I have seen in Himachal what is, in Shimla, what kind of problems you face. And earlier langurs were actually hired to shoo away monkeys from these areas, which was got banned later on because they're using animals for that purpose. This is what kind of a connect happens. So you disturb their habitats, and you start also encroaching upon, and we started eating so many wild animals which we were not. And that's how the virus got transmitted to human populations, and it manifested itself. So we have to control this thing in future. That's a kind of a connect. Nature-based solutions means more trees. Like we did a very interesting case documentation in our current study called as food forest, which is a case of Himachal as well. Very enterprising industrialist, rather he worked in America for a long time. He was from Bhopal, came back to Bhopal city, and realized that we must give back to nature what he has taken. So he found out, did a lot of scanning, and then found out that the forest, which used to provide huge amount of food support to animals and even human populations, are gone from the system. Look at Avla, Mahua, and many more varieties of fruits which grow in forests. Many fruits as such, which we don't even know the names of those fruits. There's such a biodiversity existent. So he's growing those, and and because of that, animal population has come back. We get good food available for human population as well. This is how we have to make intervention to bring back nature, if not the original form, but close to what it used to be once upon a time. So this is how we must make a connect.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question by Dr. Sangeeta Ji. Greed of architect or builders may become a threat to handle these nature-based smart solutions. How to maintain those smart parameters? Is the law bodies have any penalties to curb these activities of these builders?
Please read the question again. I can't see it on my list. Can you read the question again?
Yes, ma'am. Greed of architect or builders may become a threat to handle this nature-based smart solutions. How to maintain those smart parameters? Is the law bodies have any penalties to curb these activities of the builders?
Interesting question. And then I think the second last presenter talked a lot about the legal aspects of it. And that's why, many times smart cities concept, which talks about smartness in terms of technology, but not about the non-technological, aspects, which is, greening of the areas and all. So this is definitely very much required in the system, that we should have these kinds of laws. Like we do have many places, rooftop water harvesting compulsory. How much should be the built-up area, which used to be, I remember my own house has got open space all around the house. All four sides are actually open, but we allowed that kind of, to be. We have constructed houses in a continuous way. Definitely, these are required very much to build the systems back. Recharging water is very important, and that's why rooftop water harvesting will play a role. And I was just reading an interesting piece in Times of India, I think 2-3 days back. We talked about the urban farming. We talked about agriculture farming, urban agricultural farming. We used to have trees of fruits and flowers, and we used to get puja flowers from our own home garden, all variety of fruits of grapes and guavas, mangoes, bananas, chikus, whatnot. They all had gone, and we buy from far off places, and many times they're contaminated. We used to have, I remember as a child, putting the cities and putting the kitchen's waste in the pit that we had in the house, 2-3 pits to make organic manure. We have it now also, we build up everything, but these practices have gone from the system. That need to be built back, and that's how we can solve the problem. And there should be kind of a strong guidance and strong law also for doing that. Then only things can be brought back. We say charity begins at home. This is a way we can, contribute towards conservation of nature. So this is a good initiative that is being taken up, and I think we will be able to solve such problems in future. If we have our own, what is called a circular economy in cities, if we circulate things, I'm catching my house is, completely, I would say, environmentally friendly house, and because every drop is being saved. We've got good skylights. We have got solar heating we don't have geysers. We also put a solar panel, and then we are, creating our own power. Of course, it goes to grid and then comes back to us. We are surplus in nature, and because of that, we are thinking also buying an electric car, which will because we are generating our own electricity, we can use it, and we will again putting a less pressure on the fossil fuels. I think charity begins at home, and I think everybody should put their own contribution towards that. It is a kind of a soft solution, not putting everything on the shoulders of the government that they should only be doing everything, and we will just beneficiaries and users. We know our rights very well. We don't look at our responsibilities. I think if we are responsible behavior will make huge difference in the entire system. Thank you.
Mohua ji has asked, how is disaster management integrated in the aspirational district program? Is there any training component for disaster preparedness under this, particularly for Himalayan states?
Read the second one also, so that, or maybe one. Okay, maybe then you may not be able to register. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I haven't got into that details of the special districts plans, but I think there has been a lot of initiative. I know in Madhya Pradesh to talk about these kinds of solutions on ground, and and the recent initiative of the Niti Aayog to also popularize natural farming to put into systems. Every actually district should have, or panchayat should have at least one village to be completely organic in nature, naturally farmed in nature. So I think these kinds of things will definitely get juxtaposed to special districts plans. I will have to find out exactly what is happening, but yeah, it should be built into the system to make these districts disaster proof and more climate resilient in nature. That's what aspiration is, to become sustainable, to achieve SDGs, I think, achieve NDCs, and they should be a part of, but I cannot give you exact precise answer for that because I need to look at what comprises of the plans of aspiration districts.
Arunji has asked, as is the case in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, travelers are currently damaging the environment and ecosystem with their footprints and waste or garbage. How can we integrate ecotourism with existing planning and management policies?
Well, ecotourism has been a part of the planning. It's more of a matter of compliance, monitoring and evaluation, monitoring the whole process. I'll give you a very interesting example of visiting Rohtang Pass long ago, I think maybe 15 years ago. And since then, he very, very, I would say proactive in introducing such, elements, initiatives in their process. And there was, we have to pay an environmental tax to enter the Manali zone and go to Rohtang Pass. And that tax is effectively used to maintain these areas. So I found this was done definitely, but when we reached Rohtang, there were lots of people using these plastic packets for wafers and everything. And they were just throwing them in the snow. I stopped somebody. I said, why are you doing this? Koi baat nahi, madam, wo to isko recycle kar lega. I mean, how could you think about plastic getting recycled? No. Just as you keep things in refrigerator, they remain the way they are. They will also remain the way they are. And they will clog other things as well. So this is what, we need to build into more environmental awareness. And of course, in many national parks, we do have such constraints or control systems of using only, paper bags and not using plastics at all. Himachal also became first state to put a ban on plastic use in one of the green states. Sikkim became, the entire state is organic in nature. I think that's how initiatives will make a difference. But as I said, it is the individual who will make the difference. Unless your mind is changed, you cannot do anything else. So that's what is very much required. To more awareness amongst people. Still, I see people, throwing things out of the car and a lot of plastics being used and not, segregate their waste. So all such things, or every habit will contribute towards that. And ultimately, when you are making a difference, you're making these initiatives, taking the initiatives, you should be also incentivized. I realize that as well. For example, switching to solar power, from the conventional power. If the government gives incentives, like in the US, for example, the moment you switch, immediately there's an incentive coming to you, maybe reduction in your bill or a tax exemption will be given to you. But here, it's picking up gradually. Many states, UP has gone for that, MP has gone for that. Like, we get a kind of a refund for what we're adding to which is a net addition to the grid of the government. So this is how things will definitely happen in the future.
Karnika, I would like to respond to two issues. Those issues that came from the QA box. Interestingly, the two have one is on tourism, what Dr. Madhu just responded. Just to have additional inputs. And another one on the planners' greed. Actually, it's not planners' greed. It's a systemic crisis that I would like to put it. And there's a very interesting book by Samuel Stein called The Capital City. Probably is one of the finest planners that US has produced. And in his and this I've quoted several times. So maybe some of the listeners may be listening it for another time. And that is that, look, we planners are not corrupt. It's the system that makes us corrupt. Take, for example, this push from glass capital around the world. And you see in the last 3 decades, the entire typologies that we've been doing in our architectural interface or architectural design happens to be glass everywhere. And now we're realizing, no, it's not a very good climate adapted material, okay? And also not hygienic. So I think it's more to do with the systemic crisis, and that's what I raised this. That's why I raised this issue in a previous discussion. That if that happens in Mumbai, the planning happens to be with the city government and in participatory mode with the people. I think that would be one of the ways in which we could limit the extremist role of the big capital that plays in our architectural design, the kind of real estate that it plays. And I have a number of examples, how Gurgaon has been completely, I mean, those lakes, water bodies have been completely usurped by the real estate mafia. So it's not just the planners, I would say, it's the systemic crisis, and planners happens to be one of those facilitators. I think that's how I would like to put it, the perspective. The second issue about tourism, and since I come from that mountain state, as Dr. Madhu has pointed out, yes, incentivization, but also penalization, ma'am, I would say. Penalty has to be very strictly enforced. And this is what we have seen in Simla, where our ban on plastic with very strong enforcement and with multiple agencies enforcing the ban, we were able to, implement it almost 90%, 95%. So, this is what, because I was instrumental in writing the vision document for Leh, and this is what we've been arguing and asking the Leh government, that for heaven's sake, now it's high time that you should start raising a green fees on the tourists that enter your town. I mean, this is what we did in Simla. I don't know whether that continues or not. But that green fee shouldn't go into paying the salaries of your staff of the municipal corporation. There should be an escrow account, and through that escrow account, you should create more green ecological spaces that you can for the town. But yeah, I mean, because it's a double-edged sword, you can't expect the tourists not to come, because they have to come. They are bread and butter of our people. But simultaneously, you have to find more sustainable solutions. For example, instead of large, big capital groups entering into the hospitality industry, now we have umpteen number of homestays, which I find more sustainable, okay, from the tourism perspective. So yeah, I think, and then of course, what ma'am has also said, Dr. Madhu, that it's also a question of behavioral change. You have to hammer it down, you have to incentivize, but you have to penalize also, and that penalty has to be strictly enforced. This is what we've seen, and this creates a complete behavioral change. Now, take for example the mall in Simla. There's this last anecdote that I would like to share. One of our very funny chief justices passed an order in Simla that we have certain roads which are completely forbidden for motor transport. Okay, for example, the mall, the ridge. And this chief justice said, this is a colonial legacy, and I want to end it, and I'll take my car to the famous Gaiety Theatre. Can you believe not a single Simlite took his or her car, and then finally that order was set aside, saying that what a stupid judgment this was. So, this behavioral change with continuous hammering down also subsumes into the consciousness. And this is the consciousness that I think, of course, the behavioral change that we talk about. So, yeah, I think just these two issues that I thought I must respond from, just to make an additional point, what Dr. Madhu said. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Madhu. Kanika, you can take over, and then maybe thank all our speakers and participants.
There are no other questions, sir. If you can wrap up the session, sir.
No, I don't think I have to wrap up, because tomorrow we'll do the final wrap up. It's just that it's been a fascinating 2-day workshop, and we have another day to go. And it's more to sensitize our people, and that's what we've been saying since yesterday. Because unfortunately, this still doesn't happen to be one of the agendas of mainstream politics or, even mainstream discussions. So I think that's one part, apart from sensitizing and creating an environment, because this is not the business of the elite. This is not just the business of civil society organizations. This has to be the business of every common citizen. And it's this urban commons and, that play an important role in the ecological and what Dr. Madhu was saying, nature-based solutions, which are getting robbed at a very steadfast pace. I think it's high time that we create this environment in whatever way we can. And then we have some very fascinating positive results. I think tomorrow probably we'll be sharing some of those stories where, for example, in Gorakhpur, how you have the Gorakhpur Environment Action Group that has been able to really intervene and protect some of the water bodies. And in Bangalore, how your wastewater is being now pumped outside the city. And I visited Chikmagalur recently, and I could easily feel, the water level has risen there in some of the neighboring towns. So there are some interesting stories, but I think more on that, it's not just individuals, it's not just a few examples that has to steer the narrative. The narrative has to come from somewhere else. And I think this is one of the sensitization workshop that we intend to do for that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Madhu. Thank you all our speakers who have been here. I think that you can take over and say a final thank you.
Thank you, Tikendra.
Thank you very much for having me this session. Thank you very much.
As we come to the end of day 2 of the three-day online training program, I, Karnika Arun, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute. The topic in discussion now for today was making Indian cities disaster and climate change resilient towards responsive and actionable urban planning, policy and development, organized by IMPRI and NIDM. We are grateful to Professor Anil K. Gupta, Tikendra Singh Panwar, Sameer Unhale, Himanshu Shekhar, Dr. Shweta Vaidyadas, and Dr. Verma for their presentations and insightful points. Thanks to the participants who have raised questions and participated. We are thankful if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live. We welcome you tomorrow for our day 3 of our session by our distinguished experts. I hope you continue to join into our future IMPRI web policy talks and web policy learnings. Thank you. Have a good day.